Suddenly, the gates of hell appeared in the sky. Out of these gates crawled multitudes of creatures known as wazawai. With stunning speed, they trampled humanity. It seemed that this was the beginning of the end. However, humanity continued to resist. During the invasion, each human gained their own level and new skills that gave them the ability to fight on equal footing with the wazawai. The world survived, and now the value of each person was determined according to their level and skills. Among all the owners of the new skills, there were 10 strongest, nicknamed the Numbers. They were heroes who had saved mankind more than once and hope for the whole world in the new reality. The boy looked up at a high-rise building with a picture of the Numbers team. He dreamed that one day he would stand in line with these heroes. However, at the moment, his wish was nothing more than a fantasy. This kid's name is Koigami Hiroya, and he was one of those saved by the heroic Numbers. From that moment on, the kid gave himself his word that one day he would join this team to save humanity from monsters. However, the reality was much harsher. Now every person's strength could be safely tracked. And while the strong people became more and more successful and visible, the weak ones became more and more miserable. Hiroya was one of those unlucky ones. It had already been 6 years since his level had risen to the 8th level. A person with such a low level at such an age was completely useless in the new world, where everyone had their own superpowers. The sudden deafening roar of a siren interrupted the guy's thoughts. The announcement of the monster invasion took many people by surprise. In the middle of the street, a girl who was frightened by the loud sound was crying. The mother tried to calm her daughter, assuring her that the heroes would surely come to their aid. Suddenly, huge clawed paws appeared in the space behind the backs of the frightened people. In the next second, a huge monster burst out and rushed towards the people. Turning towards the monster, Hiroya heard cries for help coming from there. Without thinking for a second, he rushed towards the defenseless people without thinking of the consequences. With his arms out to the sides and his body trembling, he blocked the monster's path. His gaze was filled with terror. The monster opened its mouth and let out a furious roar. The frightened guy was ready for anything, just to have any strength to fight this giant at this moment. However, in the next second, the silhouette of the hero who had used his ability appeared in front of him. It was so unexpected that Hiroya barely had time to even get a glimpse of it. Still, the long hair and blue suit made this hero too recognizable even at this speed. This was Seika Inui, a member of the Numbers, and one of the strongest people in humanity. And for Hiroya, it was also a man he admired endlessly. 6 years ago, the city was attacked by a monster called a special wazawai. Even the awakened people couldn't resist fighting him. Many died in the unequal battle. At the time of this battle, the boy was only 11 years old. By a terrible coincidence, he found himself in the very epicenter of events. Hiroya remembered few details from that day, but he saw perfectly how the Numbers of that time fought this wazawai. Among the top heroes fighting that day was Seika Inui. Thanks to numerical superiority and teamwork, the humans were getting closer to defeating the monster. Then Hiroya noticed the creature looking in his direction more and more often. Suddenly, the special wazawai abruptly stepped out of the fight and rushed towards the kid. That was the last thing he remembered from the fight. The kid woke up in the arms of one of the heroes. Inui said that the battle was over and that the worst was over. Later, Hiroya learned the name of his savior, who immediately became an idol for the guy. A woman's shrieking screams made him wake up and look around. The crowd gathered on the street was gazing longingly at their hero, who had once again saved the city. One of the female fans rushed towards Inui, knocking the already lost protagonist off his feet. When he came to his senses, the guy thought that although the popularity of the 10 members was enormous, he also had something to say to his idol. Hiroya jumped to his feet abruptly and, picking up his notebook with notes on how to enter the numbers, called out to the hero. Hearing his name, he looked at the kid in surprise. The boy in a trembling voice began to say that he had been trying for years to become as strong, but he had failed. Without interrupting his admirer, the hero calmly listened to his problems. At the end of his long monologue, the guy shouted that he wanted to become one of the number. However, Hiroya did not wait for an answer from the idol, as he was once again knocked down by one of the female fans. Holding his bruised head, the guy pulled himself up. Suddenly, he heard someone call out to him from behind. It was the girl in front of whom the boy had selflessly blocked the monster's path. The young man was glad that at least someone appreciated his contribution, but the girl suddenly ran past. Looking back, Hiroya saw that she ran towards Inui. That moment made the boy finally disappointed in his abilities. Heavy in thought, he wandered towards the school, listening on the street radio about the incident in Shibuya. At this very moment, a reporter was interviewing Seika Inui, Saying that his victory was brilliant as always, the hero modestly replied that it was their mission, and they were willing to give their lives for humanity. He recalled that 6 years ago, the city had experienced a much worse invasion in which they had lost many good people. The reporter then added that Inui survived and became one of the greatest people on the planet. With a smile on his face, the protagonist waved to his fans and left. All the way to school, the protagonist saw snippets of this interview. From what he heard, his mood worsened even more. Suddenly, a hand reached out to him from behind. The next second, a local bully named Tanba grabbed him with his heavy arm. His accomplice kicked Hiroya in the stomach with all his might. The bully explained to the brat that he had no right to behave so familiarly in front of Tanba, all because he had been selected as the next generation's the numbers candidate and labeled as a hopeful. The top man suddenly stopped his associates and told them that they shouldn't behave so rudely with such a weakling and classmate at the same time. Hiroya remembered that his classmate had become the youngest record holder for Wazawai killed. To the protagonist, his level was unattainable. Tanba told the boy that he wanted to go bowling with his friends. He fearfully replied that he couldn't skip school today. The bullies laughed and shouted that there had been some misunderstanding. With an angry look at the victim, Tanba asked if Hiroya could borrow him some money for this entertainment. The kid embarrassedly reminded him that those never paid him back the money he borrowed. Besides, Tanba's parents are very famous and rich. He laughed and said that in his snot he didn't understand the whole point of what was going on. Suddenly, the bulky man shouted that gambling with the money of weaklings is the most interesting thing to do, and then hit the protagonist. From the fallen wallet, the bully was able to get only a small amount of money. Throwing the wallet aside, the bully, with a smirk, noted that the kid originally should have made such a pitiful face. The impact of Tanba's punch caused blood to appear on Hiroya's face. One of the bullies remarked that members of the numbers were paid a lot of money. The ringleader added that the best heroes have as much power as presidents. The words of these scoundrels that the numbers must have everything, women, money, and a beautiful life, hurt the protagonist badly. Raising his eyes, he whispered that it wasn't true. Looking at the bullies, Hiroya shouted that they were not wrong. Enraged, he lunged at the ringleader and shouted that numbers was not as vulgar as bullies like them, adding that he would never become a number. The enraged Tanba ordered the brat to repeat his words. After a brief silence, he told his accomplices that bowling was cancelled for the day. Determined to teach the weakling a lesson, they dragged him off to an even more deserted location. Tanba struck Hiroya one blow after another. Beating the victim with impunity, the bully said that this lesson would teach the brat to be quiet when he needed to be. When the bully got bored with the beating, he offered to remind the weakling of his level. Ryoji Tanba was one of the strongest heroes who had ever lived, with an incredible 2,500th level for his age. He reminded the beaten kid that he could easily break him in half if he wanted to. In addition, the thug has one of the most effective and interesting abilities, Pocket. With this ability, Tanba can appropriate anything and use it by taking it in and taking it out. With a smirk, he offered the weakling a chance to experience the effects of this ability on himself. The huge creature lunged towards Hiroya, who immediately rushed to run away. Tanba shouted at the victim that he should run faster if he didn't want to be eaten. Hiroya accidentally tripped over the pit and fell, hitting his face on the concrete with all his might. The entity immediately gripped the guy's leg tightly and lifted him high and above the ground. It then slammed the victim sharply to the ground, raising a huge cloud of dust. When the dust cleared, the protagonist looked at the place of the bite and could not believe his eyes. Then his body was pierced by a sharp pain and he screamed violently. The hooligans could not understand what they had to do with this brat. Tanba offered to save the protagonist if he said that he was just attacked by a small monster. When Hiroya didn't answer, he laughed and said that the kid would be on a leash for the rest of his life. The kid couldn't say a word because of the resentment and pain he felt. Suddenly, Tanba stepped on some notebook. Looking down, he read the title, which made him laugh unbelievably. Picking up the diary and opening it, the bully began to read the main character's notes on how to become a number. Then he laughed and said that even despite all these methods, the guy's level still hadn't increased. Bending over to the victim, Tanba lifted him up by his shirt and said that pathetic people like him could never become even a shadow of a hero. The desperate boy couldn't understand why he had to suffer so much. Having lost all hope that his life could change, he decided that it was better to die here and now. Closing his eyes, Hiroya suddenly saw a bright flame in front of him. The non-human silhouette emitting those flames said that this brat was even more pathetic than expected. After imagining his abusers again, he couldn't tell whose voice it was. When Hiroya saw that the world had stopped, he was surprised that he could still hear someone since he was supposed to be dead. The strange voice suddenly added that people die from rather trivial things. Hiroya asked the creature what it was. The silhouette replied that its name was Mugen. The entity was surprised that the guy had forgotten what happened 6 years ago, since that was when they first met. Hiroya remembered that it was this particular Wazawai that had defeated Seika Inui. But the monster suddenly replied that he had never been defeated, and had spent all those 6 years in the guy's body. A surprised Hiroya asked how that was possible. Mugen replied that after exhausting his powers, he tried to steal the body of a man who was nearby at the time. Coincidentally, the only suitable person in the vicinity was the 11-year-old Hiroya. But something went wrong during the attempted absorption. He himself was absorbed by some weakling. All these years, the monster was disgusted to watch his human shell degenerate. But despite 6 years of humiliation, Mugen was grateful to the human for saving his life. Finished explaining the gist of what was happening, the creature approached the guy and told him that he would die soon. Hiroya seemed to have already accepted his fate. Suddenly, the monster asked the guy why he thought his life had been thrown away like spent garbage. With no response, he said that it was all about the weakness of the protagonist. Continuing to press Hiroya, Mugen suggested that the boy was ready to kill those guys in that spot. The demon then suggested that the protagonist should taste that power for the first and last time in his life. Unexpectedly, he said that this was not the ending he wanted at all, and the power he had desired all his life, he would like to channel for the benefit of others. Hiroya didn't want the power for the sake of revenge, but wanted to be able to help for the sake of all mankind. Yet the boy could no longer affect the fusion process. The bullies were still standing over the body of the protagonist when suddenly an incredible amount of energy burst out of him. For all three of them, what happened was a complete surprise. The puddles of blood left behind after the incident suddenly rose into the air as well. In the next instant, the still recently dead brat was standing in front of the bullies. Mugen opened the level panel in front of him and asked if the guy really didn't understand why his level wasn't rising. After that, he immediately smashed the panel, laughing angrily to the entire room. The demon then stated that in fact Hiroya's level was rising in the opposite direction. The shards of the level panel showed the number of infinity. Gaining full control of the body, the monster could finally examine it. The bullies who couldn't realize what they were facing couldn't believe that this weakling was still alive. Examining his hands, Mugen came to the conclusion that, as expected, the human body was very weak. Pressing his middle finger a little harder than usual, he easily broke it. While the accomplices laughed, not realizing what was going on, the ringleader carefully watched the strange actions of the weakling, who should be dead by now. Finally angry, the monster whispered to the little bastards that they had better try not to die too quickly. Meanwhile, in the city, life went on as usual. Inui was greeted at the office by the receptionist, who confirmed that there were no casualties in the defense of the city, and the job was done perfectly as always. The hero said that he was lucky that the scene was close, and one shouldn't relax in any case. Seeing that Inui was thinking about something, the girl asked what was wrong. The hero replied that he met the guy he saved during the incident 6 years ago. Suddenly, he disappointedly said that he had done something bad, and it should have been brought up earlier. A moment later, the hero felt an extreme pressure. An aura of such incredible power scared the hell out of him. He jumped up sharply from his chair and began to go through all the possible variants of what had happened. To his great regret, Inui came to the conclusion that a calamity-class monster had awakened somewhere. At the same time, upon hearing the offensive nickname, one of the bullies pounced on Hiroya. Activating his ability on the move, he shouted that he didn't want to hear such nonsense from such a brat. In the next instant, he threw a powerful punch that suddenly missed its target. At the same moment, the bully's body was covered with dozens of small cuts on all sides. Without standing on his feet for even a second, the bully's breathless body fell to the ground. Mugen shrieked in delight that he had missed the sound of bones breaking for 6 whole years. At the sight of what had happened, Tanba became extremely nervous. This monster no longer looked like the brat they had been beating up. To the leader's surprise, his second accomplice was not impressed. Standing up in a fighting stance, he activated his ability. Shouting insults in the direction of his opponent, he attacked him. From the hands of the bully to the side of the protagonist flew out barbs that wrapped around his body. But barely had he rejoiced that he had grabbed his opponent, his ability was suddenly deactivated. It happened so quickly that the bully didn't even have time to react to the hand brought up to his forehead. The very next instant, a powerful snap shattered his head and threw him far away. After the second accomplice had been taken out, the demon shouted with relish that this was too boring. Wanting to experience a slightly more tense situation, he sensed that the third bully was ready to engage. Turning around, Mugen saw his opponent preparing his ability. A sparse smoke from the raised dust began to cover the building. The enraged Tanba shouted that the brat had to stop getting carried away, or he would forget where he truly belonged. Dozens of blades rushed towards Mugen in the same second. However, the man simply swung his hand, and all the blades instantly shattered. Instantly covering the distance to his opponent, he immediately retaliated with a strike of devastating power. Tanba flew into the wall with such force that it cracked. Mugen lazily said that the small bipeds should just sleep. The violent rumble outside the window was exactly what the demon had expected. From there, two huge eyes stared back at him. In the next instant, the monster burst into the room, shattering the wall. Turning to his new opponent, Mugen grinned, wondering if the one had come to celebrate his return. However, such a creature was unlikely to have such a mind, most likely attracted by the fluctuating force. Coming to his senses after the stunning blow, Tanba stared in horror at what was happening. Barely had his classmate awakened to his power, but immediately a new problem was thrust upon him in the form of a dangerous Wazawai. The appearance of a new, stronger opponent only made Mugen more excited. A monster like this was perfect for practicing after waking up. But barely had he thought about it, immediately the demonic powers lost their hold. Suddenly, control over his body returned to Hiroya. The guy couldn't believe that he was still alive. In the same second, Mugen tried to regain control of the human body. He was greatly surprised that the guy's mind was still intact. However, the demon's ability to control the body was much higher. Mugen suggested the brat enjoy what was happening and not interfere. The protagonist asked the demon what the demon was up to. With a smirk, the monster replied that he would do what was predetermined 6 years ago. Images of the destroyed city flashed before his eyes. He realized that if he did not intervene, the situation of 6 years ago would repeat itself, but with much more serious consequences. Feeling his superiority in controlling his body, the demon said he would first kill the Wazawai and then put on a show for all mankind. But suddenly his arms stopped obeying him. He felt something trying to take control of his body. Hiroya gathered his last efforts to regain control of his own body. Such powerful resistance came as a complete surprise to Mugen. Having lived in the guy's body for 6 years, he had assumed it would go quite easily. However, Hiroya had once again trapped the demon spirit inside the body. Upon waking up, the guy looked around his body in surprise. He still couldn't believe that he had succeeded in subduing such a powerful demon. But now, there was a much bigger problem right in front of him in the form of another, physically real monster. Mugen shouted nervously that the kid had to do something or he would die. The monster offered Hiroya to voluntarily give up control of his body for the duration of this fight. At the same moment, the monster opposite went on the attack. The guy dodged the first blow from the huge tentacles with amazing agility. For himself, it was a great surprise. He felt Mugen's influence making him move much faster and more agile. The demon realized that the guy was somehow using some of his power. After a few more successes at the gate, Hiroya decided to counterattack and threw a Wazawai strike. Then he thought he could handle even such a powerful monster. But suddenly one of the tentacles grabbed the guy's leg. The grip was too strong, and it was impossible to do anything. With a full swing, the monster slammed the guy's body into the ground. The Wazawai then lifted the victim's body to check for signs of life. He was still conscious, but the blow was too strong to continue the fight. Realizing that they could both die, Mugen helped the half-dead Hiroya activate a special skill. The ability called Infinite Awakening gave immense unparalleled power. After using this skill, the enemy's body began to glow from within. Soon after, there was a colossal explosion that tore the monster to pieces. The building in which all the events described above took place was almost completely destroyed. When the smoke cleared, Hiroya saw the results of his ability. Not far from him lay Tanba, barely alive. The guy still couldn't believe that he had somehow managed to destroy an entire building. While the protagonist was recovering, Mugen was analyzing the situation. He still couldn't explain how some kid had managed to take control of his body. The setting sun was illuminating the ruins of the building. This was how he remembered the day Mugen had met him. At that moment, he had no idea what that fateful encounter would entail. The news had instantly spread through the city's channels that a new monster attack had caused an entire building to be destroyed. Metropolis Operations Headquarters and police, as well as the numbers, were brought in to investigate. Hiroya watched the news in horror, for this incident had happened not far from his home. At this moment, he was visited by a very strange déjà vu. It seemed as if he himself was in that place, and this explosion happened because of him. But the boy could not believe that he would have succeeded in destroying an entire house. Since yesterday, he felt a little strange. He still had level 8, but the sensations in his body were much more different from normal. Looking in the mirror, he suddenly discovered a few red strands in his hair. A sudden painful sensation made him examine his left leg, and he saw a huge scar. Barely did Hiroya realize that this was not a dream, but immediately Mugen turned to him. The same second his consciousness was in some kind of space. A sudden ominous voice ordered the boy to bow his head before the great Mugen. However, the demon himself said that the man would not be able to interfere with his plans. Without thinking, the boy asked what exactly Mugen wanted to achieve by staying in his body. The monster replied that he saw no point in answering human questions. Instead of answering, he tried to get into the guy's subconscious. In it, he saw the memories of his coming 6 years ago. The protagonist fell to his knees, unable to relive those memories again. He realized that the creature was trying to get inside his head, and all it reeked of was chaos and destruction. Still, Hiroya wasn't going to go along with the monster and do what it wanted. He told the demon that he couldn't get rid of him that easily. The monster replied that the guy was right, and Mugen didn't understand why his body had been absorbed by someone like him. But the demon understood perfectly well that if the guy dies, the body will go to him. After these words, the protagonist was convinced that he definitely couldn't trust this creature with his life. Mugen grinned and added that he assumed it wouldn't take too long. When the boy asked why the demon thought so, he suggested the brat think about why that huge creature had come to them yesterday. Hiroya remained silent, and the demon replied that Wazawai would instinctively go where the screams of agony were coming from. The boy thought that if that was true, then that made things a lot more difficult. In that case, the monsters would always be eager to find him. Mugen said that these creatures were no problem for him, but Hiroya himself would not be able to handle them and would die quickly. The demon said that he would look forward to taking possession of the boy's body. After the conversation, the protagonist headed towards the subway. He realized that he was in a hopeless situation, because with the 8th level he is no difficulty even for the weakest monster. In addition, he can't use the power of demons to survive. Given the uniqueness of the situation, this was not a problem he should solve alone. Trapping a power of such might within him was a problem for the entire human race. He needed someone to help him solve the situation. The only one who immediately came to mind was Seika Inui. Hiroya was afraid, but he believed that if he told the truth, he could get help. When he got off at one of the stations, he headed towards the nearest exit. Suddenly, he was called out by a tall guy in the crowd. 2 thugs approached the protagonist and started asking what a useless guy like Hiroya was doing in a place like this. The boy tried to insist that he was in a hurry and needed to go, but the hooligans took his words for another insolence. The bully in the black t-shirt said it was time to teach Tanba's puppy a lesson. Before the protagonist had time to realize it, he immediately received a powerful blow with a fist in the face. To the great surprise of the guy, he felt absolutely no pain from the blow. But the bully immediately grabbed his arm and began to scream that it was very painful. Seeing that his friend's hand was bloody, the second bully attacked Hiroya. The frightened boy put his hands out in front of him and suddenly pushed his assailant away with all his might. The push was so powerful that the bully flew off the platform and straight onto the tracks. Surprised by his new strength, Hiroya asked the bully if he was hurt. Before he could finish his question, a huge monster suddenly burst out of the tunnel. The bully, who was lying on the tracks, only had time to think that he was dead. At that moment, the protagonist realized that the demon was not lying, and the monsters really came for him. He deftly jumped aside while managing to grab his assailant. Both guys fell onto the platform, saving themselves from the monster that flew past. Hiroya once again noted that such movements he makes on the level of reflexes. When he looked at his reflection, he realized that it was probably not his doing. The huge monster, meanwhile, loomed over its victims. The lad looked at the creature in horror, unsure if he could give it an equal fight. In a moment, he was distracted by a woman's hoarse scream from the other side of the platform. It appeared that several other similar creatures had already managed to climb onto the platform and attack the humans. Suddenly, Mugen's voice from inside said that these creatures had come for him. The Wazawai attacked one person after another, leaving them no chance. Hiroya stood at a loss, remembering his level, and didn't know what to do. If he wanted to save people, he would have to make up his mind and use the power of Wazawai. The table with his stats started to crack and emit a red glow once again. At this point, the guy decided that it didn't matter if the power was granted by the heavens or monsters, as long as using it would help save people. The protagonist once again managed to activate the Infinite Awakening ability. Having regained that very power, the guy accepted that it was his power. With a furious rage, he attacked the first creature he saw. The monster that had nearly eaten one of the girls on the platform was taken out of the fight with one precise blow. Realizing that he couldn't survive in an unequal fight without Mugen's help, he decided that he would simply steal his power. With great speed, Hiroya swept across the entire station, killing every monster in his path. The people didn't even have time to realize what had happened. Many of them were already on the verge of death. The guy had already stopped, and the shattered bodies of the monsters were still falling. Mugen was surprised that the kid had once again dared to use his power. Having finished the fight in a matter of seconds, Hiroya stopped and looked at his hands in horror. Such colossal power he had never even dreamed of. When he came to his senses, he heard the voice of the girl he had saved in the first place. She thanked him for saving her life. Then one by one, people ran up to their savior and asked him if he was a ranker. The bullies who had been miraculously saved in the carnage looked at the boy in surprise. This was how Hiroya saved many human lives with his own hands for the first time. Knowing that from now on he would always be useful to society, the boy headed for the exit. Now, he will not let the demon do what he wants it to do. At the same time, one of the patients in the city hospital was much more irritable than usual. The same name kept coming from his room. It was Tanba, the guy who miraculously survived the collapse of that building. He kept repeating the protagonist's name relentlessly, spelling that he would never forgive him. Suddenly, a nurse entered his room and said he had a visitor. The kid angrily replied that he had already said that he wanted to be alone in the near future. However, the unexpected visitor replied that talking to the nurses who cared for you should be more gentle. That visitor was Seika Inui. The young man was shocked when he saw one of the members of the Numbers. The hero asked Tanba if his wounds were healing well, as it was rare for anyone to survive battles with Wazawai of this level. The boy noticed that there was also a girl standing next to the hero, who was also from the top 10. So the situation was much more serious than he had realized. Inui explained that the Numbers were currently investigating the case against the unknown person who was able to kill that monster. At this moment, the wounded bully remembered how the person he was humiliating had easily dealt with such a strong monster. He was terribly angry at that brat and didn't know what to do. Deciding that the Numbers knew nothing about the incident anyway, Tanba pointed to himself and said that he had personally killed that Wazawai. He then added loudly that he thought he deserved to be part of the top 10. The bully couldn't believe that he had been saved by some pathetic little brat who had gotten his powers out of nowhere. Inui carefully studied the behavior and emotions of the interviewee and drew certain conclusions. His obviously unstable emotional state spoke volumes about his prospects. Smiling, Inui said that the young man needed to heal his wounds first. Deciding that this was not an indirect refusal to accept him into the team, Tanba asked the heroes not to leave and to listen to him. The pair distanced themselves from the chamber, after which the girl said that this guy was a total blunder in the hero's training system, and she would break him in one fell swoop. Her interlocutor chuckled and said that actually this youngster was identified as a hopeful. The girl scornfully said that in that case the days of this world were numbered. Inui also remarked that another guy had survived the incident. The girl asked who went to look for him. The hero replied that the fast-growing number 13 had gone to him. The companion asked if this was normal, to which she received the answer that if the enemy has a high rank, one should be prepared for it. The hero chosen to search for the surviving child was moving towards the high tower. That man's name was Kusanagi K. The area around this tall building was very crowded. This was also the place where the protagonist arrived. This was the headquarters of the Ranker Association. Any information about Wazawai could be found here. At different times, every ranker in Japan was sure to come here. And also here was the base of the top 10 rankers in the world, nicknamed the Numbers. This was where Hiroya planned to find Inui. The guy might be able to deal with monsters on his own, but he couldn't defeat the demon inside him. In addition, in case Mugen could seize control of the body, it is necessary that there was someone who could kill him. And such a person, according to the protagonist, could only be Seika Inui. After gathering his thoughts, the guy headed towards the main entrance. In the main hall, he was met by the nice-looking counselors. A surprised Hiroya suggested that it was probably one of the local employees' abilities and only one body was real. One of the counselors asked the boy how she could help him. The one replied that he would like to meet Inui-san. The girl replied that the hero was not present at the moment and asked if the meeting was scheduled, to which Hiroya replied in the negative. Then the consultant decided to clarify the data of the guy, and he gave his age and name. Having run the name through the database, the girl was surprised that the young man had not registered his special skill yet. She reminded him that this procedure was mandatory for all awakened, and evasion of this registration was a serious crime. In an attempt to smooth things over, The protagonist said that he had only recently awakened, and that his skills hadn't manifested for quite some time. The counselor said that it wasn't a problem and asked the guy to register his skill and asked if he wanted to register as a ranker. The girl asked the guy to put his hand on the scanner and also said she was about to talk about all things ranker related. Meanwhile, Mugen was pensively looking at what was going on around him. The whole thing was boring him. At the moment when the monster was just thinking that everyone standing here wasn't worth a grain of rice, an interesting person appeared from behind. The protagonist, who was busy registering his skill, didn't immediately notice such a strong aura. The counselor, meanwhile, was telling him that registering as a ranker allows a person to gain their own rank, which increases with killing a wazawai. She also reminded that the top 10 rankers get placed on the numbers team, whose members have the opportunity to receive the best rewards and honors. The girl continued to talk about the benefits of the rankers, but Hiroya wasn't listening to her as attentively anymore. He had originally come here to deal with the demon inside him, but now he had the opportunity to become what he had originally wanted to be. It remained to be seen if it was possible to do so with such a powerful entity sitting inside of you. The problem was also that working as a ranker could expose Mugen. After passing the background check, the registration was successfully completed and Hiroya officially became a ranker. The panel with his personal stats should have now been updated, including the appearance of the skill names. However, despite officially registering as a ranker, the skill name never appeared. It was the first time the girl encountered such a situation, but suggested that it might have been a server error. In turn, the protagonist was unspeakably happy that there was a dash in his style. Otherwise, it could have exposed the monster inside him. The counselor said that due to the uniqueness of the error, further confirmation was required. Hiroya barely had time to get nervous. However, suddenly someone called out to him from behind. An unfamiliar voice called out his name, which was even stranger in this situation. The person standing behind him had used his ability right in a crowded place without warning. With a powerful blast of his aura, he threw the people standing around him off. The protagonist prepared to repel the attacks, but he realized that the forces were too unequal. He didn't understand what was happening, and it was doubly pressuring him. The man opposite stood silently looking at the guy. Suddenly, he asked if Hiroya could be the one. The people crowded around quickly recognized this man as Kusanagi K, one of the most famous rankers. He was one of the 20 strongest fighters against the Wazawai, and many called him a complete lunatic. Realizing that a fight between the rankers was about to break out against the rules, people hurriedly began to scatter. Hiroya asked his opponent what he was up to, and reminded him that it was dangerous to do such things in public. Kei only smirked and said that he had heard as if the boy was stronger than him. Those words put the protagonist in a stupor. He didn't realize who could say such a thing about him. A few hours before, Kei, sitting in a bar, irritably asked his interlocutor why he had called him. When he didn't get an answer from him, he asked again if he had finally decided to have a fair fight. Inui replied that this was not about their personal relationship. Kei was about to leave when his colleague offered him a glass of milk at his expense. Without thinking long, the rancher said he would leave after he had a drink. Getting to the point, Inui said he needed to meet a guy who had survived an encounter with a very strong Wazawai. When asked by Kei what was so special about this kid, Inui said that he felt a fluctuation of power the moment the creature appeared, which meant that if this particular brat had defeated that Wazawai, he might be even stronger than Kei. Inui wanted to find out everything about that brat, so he sent one of his best to this task. When asked by his colleague if they could fight, Inui replied that he could act on the situation. Finishing his glass of milk, Kei reminded his interlocutor that he was still eager to fight him. Inui grinned and said that when the time came, he would be ready to accept the challenge. And now there stood before him this brat who, according to his counterpart, had defeated the powerful Wazawai. Kei saw his opponent's extremely modest performance and remarked that this could not be true. At this point, Hiroya experienced extreme tension, as if he was being read like an open book. None of the bullies who had clamped him in the back alley would even come close to matching the aura level of this man. Realizing that talking would get him nowhere, Kei decided to take action. He used one of his abilities on the protagonist, who successfully dodged it. The guy angrily demanded that it all stop and stated that he had no intentions of fighting anyone. Kei reacted without emotion and said that in that case Hiroya would have to try to stop him. Dodging more and more attacks, the protagonist didn't know what he should do. He realized that if he received any damage, in that case the demon's powers might suddenly awaken. From the looks of it, Kei did not want to stop under any circumstances. By inflicting more and more powerful attacks, he forced the protagonist to move faster and faster. Kei was eager for the guy to unleash his true power. Being in his body without Mugen's help, it was increasingly difficult for the protagonist to fend off the attacks. Suddenly, Hiroya felt someone behind him. It was a child who had inexplicably ended up in the hall. Hiroya stepped between the child and Kei and blocked his ability without difficulty. The light from the blocked strike spread for several blocks around the building. The smoke cleared, and Kei stood the same stance he had originally stood. In front of him, covering the child with his body, stood Hiroya. As number 13 had originally assumed, this young man's rank was clearly above the 8th rank. Outraged that the protagonist was attacking a defenseless child, Hiroya demanded to stop this buffoonery to announce his demands. The enraged protagonist reminded him that this power was for fighting monsters. To cries that this power was meant to protect humans, Kei suddenly replied that he didn't care about that. It was a short silence as number 13 explained that he was just interested in the process of battle itself, and he didn't care whether it was humans or monsters to fight. All he wanted, all these long years, was to test his own strength. Being beyond furious, the protagonist once again ordered his opponent to deal with bullshit. He shouted hatefully that Kei was arrogant for possessing such power, and therefore no different from a Wazawai. Number 13 smiled slightly and said that in such a case there was only one way out. Creating a powerful spell in front of him, he said that the only way to end this was to defeat him. Immediately after saying that, Kei made a lightning-fast maneuver towards his opponent and ended up right next to his face. Before the kid knew it, his enemy's fist swung over his head. By some miracle, he managed to dodge the blow. The next moment, Kei was already much farther away from the protagonist. The guy assumed that his opponent had the ability to teleport. Hiroya noticed that before approaching, Kei becomes in the same pose. Perhaps this is how he can try to anticipate the moment when the opponent will try to attack. And indeed, the very next moment, Kei practically grabbed the protagonist by the face. Hiroya barely dodged before he was immediately kicked in the face. A deafening shockwave erupted inside the hall. Looking at the way this fight was going, Mugen smiled at the fact that the kid had virtually no chance. Laughing, he said that it was about time for the kid to die and give him his body. But Hiroya, no matter what, didn't want to give up. He was still trying to match his opponent's speed, but it was almost impossible. His capabilities were on a completely different level. Another missed punch to the face sent the protagonist into a vertical flight. In the next second, Kei tried to finish off his opponent with a powerful right punch. However, this time Hiroya managed to avoid defeat and managed to dodge. In the time since the battle began, the protagonist had been unable to read his opponent's movements. Throwing himself at him time after time, this was one he could only vaguely speculate on what awaited him. Constant teleportations and energy blasts did not give a definitive understanding of the tactics by which Kusanagi Kei was fighting. The only thing Hiroya realized was that when his opponent's fist clenched, he became afraid. Every attack of the protagonist was no problem for him. Once again striking at the boy, Kei only dryly remarked that all his movements were boring. After these words, the protagonist finally fell out of this battle. His opponent's fist was striking at him without stopping. Their speed was colossally unfathomable to him. Not through exhaustion, nor in close combat was it impossible to defeat Kei. Looking at another smug egotist ready to finally kill him, the guy wondered if he was really that pathetic. At this moment, he remembered that not so long ago, he didn't have any powers at all. With these thoughts, he tried to continue the fight. However, the punch that Hiroya put all of his remaining strength into, his opponent blocked with one hand without any problems. Looking calmly into his opponent's eyes, Kei said that the brat was still at level 0. Number 13's free hand created another blob of energy. With a glance at it, the protagonist finally realized that he had lost. The final blow was delivered directly into Hiroya's uncovered torso. The brightest glow from that strike once again illuminated the nearby neighborhoods. Without even looking at the devastation caused by his blow, Kei turned around and said that Inui had tricked him again. Number 13 was barely about to leave, but the very next moment he caught an aura of incredible power. That power was coming from the man he had just knocked out. Turning around, Kei looked in the direction where the voice was coming from with a frightened look. The terrifying something that had taken over Hiroya's body was sneering at the fact that the kid had lost control of his body and handed it over to him once again. They looked at each other again. Only now, Kei didn't feel the same advantage. Now he was going to have to fight something more powerful. The number 13 had never heard of anything like this from anyone before. Standing with him was exactly the same man he had just knocked out. But now his aura was hundreds of times stronger than any creature Kei had seen in years. The rancher barely had time to think about the fact that it was as if he was facing a completely different creature, but the monster immediately attacked him. Unexpectedly for Kay himself, his reactions were not enough to fend off this lightning-fast strike. All 3 claw strikes accurately hit the target. Blood spurted out from the wounds of number 13. The sheer volume of this creature's strength was hard to contain in one's head. The creature muttered that it would be interested in ripping off the hunter's head, but the hunter was already on the verge of death. Suddenly, Kay's face lit up with happiness. Finally, he had found a worthy opponent. At the same second, he made a powerful lunge in an attempt to hit his opponent, but he easily dodged it. Mugen said with a smirk that he had recognized Kay's ability long ago. As he dodged more and more attacks from the number 13, he suggested that his ability was called compression. Continuing his attacks, Kay said that his opponent had guessed, and his ability is indeed called compression. That's when he prepared his attack and mouthed that there would be no impact, but it would just hurt. The monster seemed completely unwilling to dodge the attacks. Kay attempted his strongest attack. However, the creature did not even budge. Completely ignoring the effects of the attack, Mugen noted that the ability was quite interesting. Then a moment, he performed his lightning attack, adding that they, the Wazawai, do not have similar abilities. The fact that the man called himself a monster confused Kay completely, and he was unable to parry the blow. Number 13 was sealed into the ground with all his might after a single blow. The monster laughed viciously and muttered that man was nothing before absolute power. However, the guy was not going to give up and prepared a new spell. Abruptly turning to his opponent, he created a sphere of antimatter in the area of his left hand. Mugen's hand was completely vaporized. However, it seemed that he didn't care much about it. After whispering that it was just a fragile mouse body, he began to grow a new arm, as if nothing had happened. A couple seconds later, the limb was restored in a much more sinister form. Number 13 had never seen anything like it in his entire career. He couldn't even imagine any human being having the ability to regenerate severed limbs. It was most likely not a human being, but something else. Unable to follow his opponent's actions, Kay let himself be grabbed by his shirt. As if something weightless, the monster swung his opponent around, and then threw him as hard as he could into the wall of the building. Lying in the middle of the rubble, Kay couldn't understand how anyone could be so strong. Then, gathering his last strength, he decided to use his decisive trump card. It was an ability called Absolute Domination Shrine. Such a scenario made the demon even more excited, and he rushed into battle with renewed vigor. To the outside observers, it seemed that an entire city could be destroyed during the battle of these two. The rivals rushed towards each other with renewed vigor. Many of the people watching the battle demanded that they stop. And at the moment when the battle was about to enter a new phase, someone from the crowd suddenly rushed towards the fighters. The girl from the reception saw this person and could not believe her eyes. The opponents had already almost clashed in another round of battle. The next moment, there was a huge explosion, which shook the walls of neighboring buildings. However, when the smoke cleared, everyone saw Seika Inui standing between the opponents. Moments before the collision, he managed to block the blows of both fighters. Mugen and Kay stopped and looked in the direction Inui had come from. There stood the strongest members of the numbers team. But even though one of the numbers had intervened in the fight, Kay still couldn't calm down and was eager to fight on. Suddenly, the same girl appeared next to his head and said that the battle was over. She was supported by Inui as well, saying that it was time to stop breaking the rules and ruining people's lives. Suddenly, Mugen turned his attention to himself. Saying that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, he reminded them that the battle was still not over. As he prepared for battle, the monster suggested, as he had 6 years ago, that he would blow the entire city into small splinters. But suddenly his control over his body abruptly weakened. At that moment, the protagonist's subconscious mind regained control of his body, and the aggression waned. Once again retreating into the bowels of his subconscious, Mugen said that this body was simply disgusting. Upon waking up, the first thing the protagonist did was rejoice that he was able to defeat this monster again. He almost fell to the ground without strength, but he was backed up by Inui in time. The hero examined the boy's body. His features seemed familiar to him. A recent incident surfaced in his memories, when some crybaby had asked to take him to 10. Taking the child in his arms, he headed away from the recent battlefield. Just then he was called out by Kay and told that it was his prey. Inui ordered the number 13 to step aside in a harsh tone, explaining that his team was taking over the treatment of this child. In response to his interlocutor's indignant look, Inui reminded him that he only wanted to know if this kid was their ally or not. The number just reminded that K had just broken the law, to which the latter replied that he didn't care. Inui responded to another rudeness by reminding him that it's long past time to pick a side you're fighting for. Hiroya came to his senses sitting on a chair in some dark room. Immediately he realized that there was no way to move as his hands were bound and his neck was tied to the chair. A voice behind him suddenly asked him how he was sleeping. Recognizing his idol standing behind him, the kid got excited and introduced himself. Instead of returning greetings, Inui suddenly started listing the accusations that were attributed to the protagonist. The other members of the 10 were also standing next to him, who simply remained silent. The sudden verdict for the violation sounded like thunder. Numbers was sentencing Koigami Hiroya to death. Suddenly, the guy felt a whiff of someone's aura from behind him. He realized that it looked like this wasn't a joke and no one was going to listen to him. In the same instant, a huge skeleton figure with an equally huge scythe appeared behind his back. Inui muttered that the sentence would be carried out here and now. After looking at the skeleton, the guy realized that it was controlled by that man in the cloak and goggles from the top 10 strongest rankers. The protagonist asked not to kill him, but that ranker only coldly replied that he was doing what he was told. Hiroya looked on in horror as death was imminently approaching. He seemed to be the only one who understood what would happen if he was killed. Knowing that the demon inside would take over his body as soon as he died, Hiroya asked Inui to give him a chance to speak. However, he seemed to have already made his final decision and was not going to change it. Seconds before the execution of the sentence, the protagonist managed to blurt out that there was an essence inside him. But no sooner had he finished speaking than the skeleton with a scythe struck a swift blow. Some time passed, and the guy opened his eyes. Then he realized that the skeleton had only cut the chain connecting his neck to the back of the chair. Moreover, his hands were also untied, and he himself was completely unharmed. At this moment, Inui coldly said that it was just as he thought. He apologized to the young man and said that he only wanted to hear the whole truth from his mouth. The number pointed at the protagonist and said that all the destructive actions performed by that child were actually done because of the wazawai sitting inside of him. Inui then looked into the camera and asked if they really still wanted to carry out the death sentence. After a short silence, the voice replied that the government trusted the numbers to do it. But if they made a mistake, Inui would personally be punished as the leader. The hero fully agreed and promised that there would be no failure. The government representative also reminded that they are allocating huge budgets to fight wazawai, and the hero's task is to cleanse this world of monsters as soon as possible. Inui bowed respectfully and said that his team is working on it. After the meeting ended, one of the 10 said that he needed to leave urgently. It was the second of the numbers, Meikyo Kurusu. He said that he was currently busy with a few small matters. In addition, the most attractive representative of the numbers in the room was possible, the number 10 named Mimimi Shinome. Immediately, 3 legendary numbers came to decide his fate. Before leaving, Kurusu suddenly said that he thought the guy should be executed anyway, as he thought all risk factors should be eliminated. The protagonist was surprised when he asked his savior why he didn't let him be executed, why he believed that there really was a demon living inside him. Inui replied with a smirk that he just had a very good sense of smell and could sense that the guy smelled strongly like wazawai. Besides, you could tell by the sudden change in personality and extremely aggressive behavior. Also, the day before, the boy did not smell like a wazawai. Summarizing also the fact that Hiroya was present during the house explosion in Shibuya, Inui assumed that the demon was somehow interacting with the boy. Either way, this situation was unprecedented. So Inui asked the protagonist to tell everything in detail. Looking at his idol, the guy felt extremely positive emotions. Despite everything that had happened, he was glad that he had gotten to him. Hiroya began his story by explaining that there was a wazawai living inside him. Because of him, the other monsters are trying to attack the guy. Plus, he'd already been attacked on the subway today. It turned out that Inui had already heard about this incident. At this point, Hiroya seriously wondered if he should continue to tell him. After gathering his thoughts, he decided to tell everything from beginning to end. But at that moment, their conversation was interrupted by a deafening roar behind Inui. Behind him stood a man in a pink jacket, and in front of him lay the corpse of one of the wazawai. The blonde man grinned as he said hello to Inui, and asked him since when did their town become a hangout for monsters. He annoyedly noted that he had killed at least 3 similar wazawai on his way here. Not bothering to listen to his acquaintance's arguments, the blonde immediately noted that he continued to feel the presence of monsters in this room. He looked angrily at the protagonist, realizing that the smell was coming from him. In the next instant, he delivered a crushing blow to Hiroya's stomach. The guy, who was totally unprepared for this turn of events, almost died. Inui fearfully rushed towards the child while his acquaintance continued to walk to the side. The number leader yelled at his coworker in a rage, calling him by the name Tayo. The latter in turn approached the groaning kid and said that the kid really looked like a human up close. The protagonist recognized the man named Kazuki Tayo, who was number 4, in that evil look. The man in the pink coat asked in surprise why they left the infected man alive. Inui replied that it was his decision. In response to his colleague's outrage as to why he didn't listen to the opinions of each of the 10, Inui explained that he wasn't going to wait for each of the 10 to make such decisions. Tayo then said that he was already here, and his opinion would have to be listened to. Without giving his leader a second thought, Tayo activated the death sentence ability. The blonde man then shouted in rage that this Wazawi brat should die right now. The protagonist didn't have time to react to this outburst, and immediately an explosion occurred. Opening his eyes, the guy saw that Inui had knocked Tayo to the ground and said that the decision had already been made. In a rage, number 4 brushed his coworker off and told him not to look down on him. He contemptuously accused Inui of making decisions in his own mind without consulting anyone for a long time now. Inui, in turn, reminded his friend that their main goal was to destroy the Wazawi and restore peaceful order. He pointed to the main character and said that people like him, who are able to commiserate with monsters, are invaluable. At the end, Inui added that they should be the light that will save all living things. However, Tayo could not be appeased, saying that such a weak and worthless person could not be the one to save the world. Suddenly, Hiroya said that he realized that he was not a valuable member of society. But now a strong Wazawi has possessed his body, and he doesn't know what might happen soon. That's why he came here to solve this problem. After that, the guy asked his idol to fulfill one request of his. Hiroya wanted Inui to kill him in case his body was suddenly possessed by a demon again. Such a very bold request from a 17-year-old boy struck the leader of the 10 to the core. He stroked the child's head and said that the words he had spoken now made him a truly strong man. Inui promised that he would try to deal with the problem and find the best way out of the situation. At this point, Tayo walked towards the exit, adding that he didn't support this idea and didn't trust this kid. Number 4's stance was unchanged. Only if all the Wazawi died would humanity have a peaceful future. After mentally seeing his colleague off, Inui turned to Hiroya, telling him that he would have to realize the bitter truth. From that moment on, life for the boy changed into before and after. There was no way to go back to his old life. Now he was starting to work side by side with numbers. At first, Hiroya thought this was exactly what he had dreamed of. But then he remembered what the numbers' attitude towards him had been. Inui said that the guy was going to have a very hard time, which would be hard for him to get used to. But in order to brighten up his life somehow, Inui thought of changing the guy's image a little. After a while, the protagonist changed into a new uniform. It was the official uniform of the number association issued for candidates. Suddenly, Inui remembered that during their recent meeting, Hiroya had asked him how to become a number. The number leader explained that he was not in that position because he had worked hard. Still, he holds the best score in terms of Wazawi killed and people saved. Therefore, in order to make it to the top 10, Hiroya must prove himself useful to humanity. After a rousing speech, Inui said he would send tasks through Rin and immediately asked Hiroya for permission to add him as a friend, to which he readily agreed. After that, the shocked guy was taken to his new apartment. Looking at the correspondence with his idol, he thought about the fact that today is hundreds of lives already lived. Suddenly, a message came on his phone that a Wazawi gate had been discovered in one of the neighborhoods. The silence of the city at night was broken only by alerts that civilians were instructed to leave the gate's discovery area. With 17 minutes to go before the creatures invaded, the protagonist was the first to arrive on the scene. Representatives of the higher classes of monsters can be detected even before the invasion begins. In such cases, the hunter's task was to destroy the gate creatures as soon as possible. It was supposed to be easy for 2 people to accomplish this task, especially when your partner is a number 4. Hiroya was greatly startled to learn that his partner this night would be Tayo. Undoubtedly, number 4's character is very difficult, but he was a unique person in his own way. Having left his family in his early college years, he had raised his fortune. And now Tayo is not only one of the strongest people in the world, but also one of the most successful people in Japan. Hiroya barely thought of this man with the nickname King of the Night, but immediately the man appeared at the protagonist's back. Coldly, glaring at his partner, Tayo warned that for any tardiness even for a second next time he would kill the boy. But suddenly, out of the blue, number 4 snapped out of his seat and said that he didn't need an excuse to just kill the brat anyway. In a rage, he called his partner a monster. This turn of events before Hiroya had even begun the gate sweep had certainly not been expected. Taiyo attacked the protagonist with lightning speed, but at the last moment he managed to dodge a powerful blow. However, his blow hit the guy's cheek, which immediately spurted blood. Hiroya asked his partner to wait so he could ask him some questions. However, Taiyo interrupted the brat and said that it was only because Seika Inui was supporting him. Hiroya really wanted to understand what was going on between these two and why they hated each other. The King of Night headed towards his partner, saying that even though the head of the numbers had left him alive, he disagreed and would now hold his own trial. There were still 15 minutes before the monsters came. That was how long the protagonist needed to hold out. Hiroya stammered at his idol, but Taiyo immediately shut him up and said that only his rules and no more worked here and now. Time continued to pass slowly. The King of the Night then suggested that it shouldn't take too long to get started. After gathering his thoughts, Hiroya got into a fighting stance and said that he was ready to be an opponent for Taiyo. Meanwhile, in the number tower, someone was still working. Inui, who was in contemplation, was also awake. Mimimi, who was passing by, said hello to him and asked why he had sent the two of them on a mission together. She was certain that the boy would not return from the mission alive. Inui explained his decision by saying that he believed Taiyo was an adult and would not do anything rash. His greatest hope rested on Koigami Hiroya, whose potential, even excluding the effects of the demon's influence, he considered immense. The number leader believed that there was something special lurking inside this guy. At the same time, a fierce battle between the two partners continued in the factory area. Unlike number 13, number 4 was not that fast. However, he was capable of inflicting tremendous damage even from a distance. Deciding that the relatively equal speed could help him, the protagonist decided to counterattack. But suddenly, it was as if his body had gone numb. Hiroya looked at his arm and was horrified. In the places of the numerous cuts inflicted on him by his opponent, areas of infection were visible. It was most likely some sort of Taiyo ability. And indeed, his ability was causing the cut areas to become infected and the resulting sharp pain. The colossal 8,100th level also increased the effects of the poison, causing limbs to go numb and tissues to die off. After a few dozen seconds, Hiroya was almost completely immobilized. He had effectively lost the unequal battle. But suddenly, he reactivated his infinite awakening ability, and the effects of the poisons no longer affected him. It was the perfect time to launch his attack. Taiyo, still confident in his superiority, pressed the guy's throat and told him that he couldn't be the hope of mankind. It made him laugh that the brat couldn't even say his last words, as his throat was already affected by the poison. Leaving the brat to die alone, Taiyo turned around and walked towards the gate. Suddenly, he heard the brat wheezing that he would not tolerate insults towards Seika Inui. Number 4 turned around and saw his opponent slowly rising to his feet. His aura changed drastically at that moment. Holding his balance, Hiroya said that he wouldn't let anyone think that he was so easily defeated. Looking at the boy's crying face, Taiyo still couldn't understand why he was still alive. Taiyo replied that he couldn't treat Inui well since his true nature is much scarier and darker. Enraged, Hiroya shouted that Inui was the only one who believed in him, and the guy would not tolerate such words about his idol. Number 4 coldly said that this kind of blind faith was very dangerous. He then immediately used another ability called Purple Snow. Suddenly, snow of unusual color really began to fall from the sky. But before the protagonist knew it, dead birds began to fall to the ground after the beautiful snowflakes. The sound of crows falling dead frightened the guy. Looking up into the sky again, he realized that the snow was poisonous. At the same second, a sharp pain pierced his body, and blood gushed out of his eyes, nose, and mouth. He realized that Taiyo's ability was actually a weapon of mass destruction. Unable to keep his balance any longer, he fell to the ground. Looking thoughtfully at the falling snow, Taiyo noted that no living creature could survive from this ability, and so he was even more interested to know how Hiroya had managed to survive. Bleeding, the guy struggled to get to his feet. At the same time, his aura was even stronger than it had been after 4th number had used his past ability. Taiyo assumed that the opponent had the ability to ignore poisons. He had no other explanation for the boy still being alive. Most likely his strength was due to the abilities of the monster inside him. The unremarkable data card of the protagonist held a mystery. Where the ability should have been displayed, there was a dash. In a fit of rage, Inui shouted that he would never give up his body to Wazawai. Such a turn of events infuriated Taiyo even more. This was the first time he had ever faced a man with poison resistance. The opponents clashed in a lightning-fast melee to finally decide the outcome of the confrontation. For several minutes, they struck each other with swift blows. However, as they were engrossed in the confrontation, they did not notice that the time to open the gate had expired. A second later, a bright glow illuminated the portal and it began to collapse. At the same moment, a huge creature burst into the human world, blocking the path of both heroes. Both boys looked at the monster with disdain. The appearance of a wazawai amidst such a heated battle seemed out of place. In a rage, the ranchers pounced on the creature and tore it to pieces in the blink of an eye. Then the gate finally collapsed with an eerie rumble. The rivals paid no attention to the massive explosion that followed. They pounced on each other with renewed vigor to decide the outcome of the confrontation. However, the announcement on the loudspeaker that the wazawai of the gate had been defeated stopped them. A pleasant female voice thanked everyone present for their cooperation and declared the battle zone a temporarily closed area. Fixing his hair, Tayo acknowledged the boy pitted against him in a fair fight. His gaze suddenly changed, and he asked the protagonist if he wanted to go with him. Such an offer came as an extreme surprise to Hiroya, and he replied that while he was pleased, he had faith in Inui. Tayo then turned around and walked away, adding lastly that he had warned the guy. The protagonist said goodbye, left to himself. Tayo's words about Inui had alerted him. At the time, he never imagined that from this moment on, number 4 would disappear without a trace. Upon reaching Inui, Hiroya spoke about the incident. The number leader apologized to the protagonist, adding that he didn't think Tayo could do such a thing. Inui took the blame for what happened as he could not foresee such an outcome. The embarrassed boy shouted into the phone that the leader had nothing to apologize for. Inui then added that family mistakes are a family responsibility, and he apologizes for what happened as an older brother. Such a statement from the idol shocked the protagonist. He had no idea that Inui and Tayo were brothers. The guy exclaimed that among ordinary people, no one knows about it, as even he has not heard of such a thing. Inui confirmed Hiroya's speculation by saying that they did not divulge it. He then asked if Tayo had said something about him. At that moment, the protagonist froze. He remembered Tayo's words about Inui's dark nature perfectly. Hiroya realized that he couldn't fully trust every person in this world, especially those he had known personally for a couple of days. So the guy decided to lie, saying that Tayo hadn't mentioned anything specific. Inui said he understood that perfectly, and added that they had successfully completed the mission anyway. Then he suggested the guy to go back to the head office as soon as possible. The next day, Hiroya went to his school for the first time in a long time. It seemed to him that he hadn't been here in a long time. Earlier in the morning, Inui had suggested that the boy go to school. To Hiroya's concerns about being attacked by wazawai during this time, he replied that he had to say goodbye to the school because of his new assignment. He asked his secretary named Shizuka to inform the protagonist if there was a sudden monster attack. After that, the number leader suggested that the guy should enjoy his last day at school properly. Hiroya was very nervous because he didn't have any good memories of his schooling. Suddenly, a loud voice called the protagonist from behind him. He turned around and saw the powerful figure of Principal Okabe towering over him. The boy's eyes flashed back to the bad memories of how this terrible man had humiliated him throughout his schooling. Now Principal Okabe was once again looking at Hiroya with an evil gaze. The boy was already starting to make excuses for his few days of absence, anticipating another beating. But suddenly the principal smilingly patted the protagonist on the shoulder and said that a couple of extra absences were not a problem for the school's pride. Such an abrupt change in the principal's tone made the boy very wary. Suddenly, he heard several girls in the crowd enthusiastically pointing their fingers in his direction, saying that he was that legendary number candidate named Koigami Hiroya. Hiroya was finally at a loss for words when someone in the crowd recognized him as the man who had defeated Wazawai during the recent incident. He immediately opened the first news site he could find on his phone and saw himself on the front page. His appearance at the school caused quite a stir. Questions about numbers and his involvement in that battle were pouring in from all sides. From all sides, he was catching rapturous glances, and people were watching every word he said. Suddenly, a tall blonde man in a red jacket appeared in the crowd and pushed his way straight to the protagonist. This bulky man was one of Tanba's gang members. In response to another insult, Hiroya nervously said that he had heard that Tanba was hospitalized. Unexpectedly, the bully said that he was not interested in the fate of their leader. Moreover, he called the protagonist an incredible guy. The bully whispered that he was a big fan of Mimimi Shinome and asked the boy to get her autograph at the first opportunity. Hiroya said that he had already seen her in real life, which made the crowd incredibly excited. Looking at the enthusiastic looks of the school's students, the guy couldn't believe what was happening. It turns out that school can still be interesting and fun. The last day gave him a storm of emotions and unforgettable moments. Sitting outside on his lunch break, Hiroya thought about how happy he was with his current situation. For a moment, he even thought that he would miss this place. The guy realized that he would never be able to return to this time again, and that made him sad. Before he knew it, a large car rammed into the school playground fence. When the dust cleared, Hiroya looked at the driver in surprise. It was Inui-san's secretary, who said that she had been instructed to rush the protagonist to the Number Association headquarters. Quickly putting Hiroya into the car, Shizuka turned around and sped off towards the city center. The remaining classmates of the protagonist's classmates on the wrecked lot stared after him with rapt attention. Within minutes, they quickly crossed several dozen blocks and raced to the headquarters. Inui was already waiting for them there. With a smile on his face, he asked Hiroya how his last day of school was. However, the guy was barely conscious after such a fast ride performed by Shizuka. Upon regaining consciousness, he cheerfully said that he had never received so much attention. He supposed it was only possible after he defeated that Wazawai. Inui smiled and said that the boy was being negative as always, explaining that he would consider it all due to his strength in such a situation. Devoutly looking into his idol's eyes, Hiroya repeated after him that it was all thanks to his powers. After that, Inui said that the boy would continue to accompany Nomi on missions. He explained that each of the top rankers had their own weirdness, and the guy would have endless problems. After explaining the situation, he clarified to the protagonist if he could accept it. They are at their wits' end. The guy said he was ready for anything. Then Inui asked his secretary to tell more details about the incident that happened recently. The girl explained that she would have to give a little introduction to the topic first. Taking the diagram in her hands, she explained that monsters use gates to move from their world to the human world. As with data transfer, it takes longer for stronger monsters to move. Looking at the boy's face, she asked why he was laughing. Hiroya explained that he was very amused by the scheme. Shizuka then nervously shouted that it was time for the boy to grow up and concentrate on the matter at hand. After that, she continued to explain. Thus, the high-grade gate displays a counter until the Wazawai's movement ends. When it ends, the monster appears. The girl then explained that a strange gate had recently opened in Yokohama. They were nicknamed the Gate That Produces Nothing. After they appeared, high-ranking rankers were sent there to guard the surrounding area and wait for the monsters to appear. However, no one ever emerged from the gate, and they asked the staff to continue watching them. After a while, the gate suddenly collapsed, but instead of Wazawai, something called black mist came out. When asked by the guy what the fog was, Inui explained that it made radio communication difficult and reduced visibility within its radius. Since there had been no similar situations yet, and the effects of the fog were not fully understood, it was decided to increase the number of ranchers surrounding the area. The guy was tasked to go into the area, help evacuate the employees, and seal the gate. Just when the protagonist thought it was simply impossible to do so, he heard someone's voice from behind him. Turning around, Hiroya saw a man with blood spurting from his mouth. It was a wounded man, barely able to stand on his feet. Barely able to string a few words together, he turned to Inui. Raising his head, the unknown man said that he was now killed by the Wazawai permanently and would no longer be able to help humanity. Taking a few more steps around the office, he collapsed, wheezing that another number would have to be assigned to the current mission. Panicked, Hiroya rushed towards the man, recognizing him as one of the numbers named Seiseki. Not knowing what to do, the boy turned to his idol and shouted that they must help this man. However, Inui's gaze at that moment was full of shame. When the shouting subsided, he told his colleague that he should stop acting like a child and reminded him that it was pointless to fight assignments in this way. After those words, Saseki took a deep breath. Turning around to the injured man, Hiroya saw the man calmly rise to his feet. At the same second, the plaster on his arms cracked and fell apart. Throwing his crutch on his shoulder, Saseki replied to number one that it hurt him to hear that. Suddenly, he approached the protagonist and asked who he was, noting that he hadn't seen him here before. Before the guy could answer, his interlocutor's face once again portrayed a grimace of pain. He fell to the floor again and started saying that it hurt him to think, to stand, and even to sit. Not understanding what was going on here, the protagonist replied that his name was Koigami Hiroya. In response, Saseki indifferently replied that he had heard about some kid who had caused such a ruckus in the association. He then turned to Inui and asked him to give him a referral to Yokohama so that he could deal with the trouble quickly. Number 1 accepted his colleague's offer and assigned him to this mission. But then Inui added that in addition to closing the gate, he would have to take Hiroya with him and train him as an instructor. Such a complication of the task was not in Saseki's plans. Overwhelmed with despair, he shouted across the room. Saseki exclaimed that he hadn't signed up for something like this and didn't want to do such an annoying task. Inui tried to calm his colleague down by saying that briefing candidates was part of the number's duties. Startled, Saseki shouted that his least favorite word was decision, as he didn't want to think for himself unnecessarily. Lying on the floor, he continued to beat hysterically and shouted that he was annoyed by the whole thing. This kind of antics of one of the strongest people in the world finally made Hiroya realize that these people are not all right in the head. After a while, a helicopter flew out from the headquarters of the Yokohama Side Ranker Association. The fog-covered city came into view. He shouted to his partner that he could see the place where the fog was coming from. Learning, the guy saw a number beating hysterically, screaming that he was afraid of heights because of aerophobia. Fainting relentlessly, Saseki shouted that such flights were discrimination against number. After a few hysterical screams, he finally passed out. The boy glanced nervously at the numbers and became convinced that this rancher was not all right mentally. After a while, the helicopter dropped the heroes off near the fog. The protagonist stated that this something looked very ominous from the outside, and he wondered what was going on inside. Remembering that they need to seal the gate, the guy turned to his partner and asked him how to do it. However, the latter was once again hysterical on the ground, screaming that he was suffering from muscle pain, malnutrition, and skull depression at times like this. Leaving the sharply panicked number on a nearby bench, Hiroya decided to walk through the fog alone. Realizing that his partner had left him no choice, the boy wondered why he was still one of numbers. Hiroya looked nervously towards the fog and wondered if he could make it on his own. After gathering his thoughts, the guy decided that for the sake of Inui, who believed in him, he would do anything. But as soon as he barely touched the fog, he was immediately sucked inside. Meanwhile, the purple smoke continued to spread through the city and reached the bench where Saseki was lying on. The number tiredly uttered that even so he was not being allowed to rest. Meanwhile, the protagonist was being pulled further and further into the fog. After a while, he was thrown into a dark shroud. Visibility around him was about 0, and it was impossible to see what part of the city he was in. Hiroya assumed that the forward teams were probably also pulled into this fog in a similar fashion. Just when he thought he might be able to find them here, he was immediately attacked by something. Abruptly stepping aside, the guy tried to get a good look at his opponent. However, to his great surprise, instead of an opponent, Hiroya saw several hands reaching for him directly from the fog. What he saw made him think that this fog was one big wazawai. The protagonist realized that he was in for a tough battle and activated his infinite awakening ability. He successfully dodged several times from being hit by the misty hands. After waiting for the right moment, Hiroya tried to attack the creature. But suddenly, his hand slipped through the mist. The dispersed entity began to form new limbs. The guy realized that he wouldn't be able to do damage with simple attacks. As he pondered on what he could do, suddenly a monster strike caught up with him. Hiroya had no trouble blocking the blow, which was incredibly powerful. But before he knew it, he was grabbed by another hand in the same second. The guy couldn't move, and several of the creature's hands were already reaching for him. Wazawai began to deliver blow after blow to the protagonist. The battered Hiroya tried to figure out why his attacks were passing him by, while the monster had no problem hitting him. Gathering all his strength, he broke free from the creature's tenacious grip. Realizing that his efforts would not be enough to win now, he decided to retreat. Hiroya decided that the only thing more foolish than fighting in the enemy's domain could be fighting an enemy whose characteristics you don't know. With these thoughts, he accelerated towards the exit. Lying on the bench, Saseki sensed that the boy had decided to run away. He figured the one must have some kind of plan. As he hid behind one of the houses, the protagonist saw hands flying past. This meant that the creature was looking for him. Besides the fact that the monster could see in such darkness, Hiroya assumed that the Wazawai had a main body somewhere controlling those hands. Trying to search the depths of his memory for some information, the guy remembered reading a book about all Wazawai once. It described the story of how one of the rankers encountered a liquid monster, later called a slime. Such creatures could control water and attack with it. Hiroya remembered that that ranker had used a rather risky method to defeat the slime. Even as he read the story, the guy wondered if such a thing was applicable to fighting Wazawai. Walking further down the block, he suddenly came across something that shook his teenage mind. Several ranchers were suspended by an invisible force in midair and showed no signs of life. Horrified, the protagonist recognized these people as the advance party sent earlier to scout this fog. The initial feeling that these men were all dead was false. They were still breathing, but it was as if they were in a deep sleep. Hiroya decided to save them by all means, as time was inexorably running out. Creating a powerful blast of aura, he shouted to draw the monster's attention to himself. Sensing the monster approaching in front of him, the guy rushed towards that direction. Suddenly, the space in front of him became as bright as the middle of the day, and 10 misty blades flew towards him. Hiroya hadn't counted on so many targets at once. Standing up in a protective stance, the protagonist tried to take cover from the skin-cutting blows. After waiting for a moment, he lightning quickly escaped the monster's blows and headed in the direction where the aura of this wazawai was coming from. However, at the end of the path, he was unexpectedly met with a dead end. Suddenly, behind him, Hiroya heard an uncharacteristic growling sound. When he turned around, he saw a creature in front of him that looked like a goblin. Realizing that it was the owner of this ability, the guy accelerated to an incredible speed, literally vaporizing in the face of the monster. The monster looked around in confusion, searching for the man, but he was much faster than the creature and was already preparing to attack him from above. Having absolute superiority over the monster, Hiroya prepared to kill it for sure. But at that moment, Seseki, who was lying on the bench, realized that he would have to intervene after all. Moments before the blow, the protagonist's powers abruptly stopped working. At a loss, he landed on the ground and stared at the goblin with a frightened look. He didn't understand how this could have happened, and thought that perhaps Mugen was to blame. But the latter only laughed evilly inside the guy's head without giving him any clue. The action of Infinite Awakening was interrupted. The protagonist saw an alert that the ability would be available in 120 seconds. Suddenly, he heard Mugen speaking to him. Laughing evilly, the demon said that you couldn't use his power like water. Stretching lazily, Seseki frustratedly pointed out that the guy without the skill wouldn't last long. Covering his hand from the sun, he called the boy an idiot. Meanwhile, the goblin looked questioningly at the hero who had almost killed him. Realizing that something had happened to the boy, he began to dance with happiness. Now there was nothing to stop him from finishing off that annoying brat. Looking at the monster's face, the guy realized that he was going to do something about it. In the same instant, a dark vortex surrounded him. In the flashes of purple flames, someone's claws appeared. A few seconds later, a huge monster loomed over the defenseless Hiroya. With a frightened look at the huge monster, he realized that the goblin had transformed into a new entity. Wazawai immediately dealt the protagonist a devastating blow. The creature's fist slammed into Hiroya's face, knocking him to the ground. Barely unconscious, the boy raised his head to look at the table indicating the ability. There was still a long time before Infinite Awakening could be reactivated. Hiroya had already decided that he had lost this battle. As a light flashed brightly ahead, the protagonist saw Seseki rushing to his aid. He ran to his aid as fast as he could, but realized that he was running out of time. In the next second, the monster's powerful energy beam pierced through the protagonist's body. Bleeding, Hiroya fell to the ground in front of the monster's feet. At the same instant, the Infinite Awakening ability was activated again. A sign appeared above the main character's body indicating the missing skill. Seeing this, Seseki finally decided that he was too late. But suddenly, a bright column of blue flame erupted into the sky from the almost lifeless body of the young man. In a matter of moments, the wound, a huge hole in his body, was gone. It made Seseki tense up. He had never seen anything like this before. The guy who seemed to be dead until a short while ago suddenly opened his eyes and began to breathe. Rolling over, he leaned his hands on the ground and greedily gulped air with his mouth. What he saw startled Numbers more than a little. In a trembling voice, he asked his ward if he was all right. The boy raised his head in surprise and saw Seseki in front of him. Looking at the potential Numbers candidate, Seseki realized that he didn't even realize that his body had been pierced. Then he realized what Inui's plan was. The perplexed monster, meanwhile, continued to loom over the people. Despite all of Hiroya's warnings, Seseki didn't even budge the moment the Wazawai tried to attack him. It was then that the protagonist saw a brightly colored object in his mentor's hand that looked like a key. Holding out the key directly in front of him, Seseki cast a spell. In the same second, a keyhole-like seal was placed on the huge monster. Turning around, Seseki walked away from the place, adding that if you forget to lock the door, you'll break your life. The protagonist looked fearfully at the creature that seemed to freeze in place. The number indifferently explained that he had frozen the creature and it would not move until he wanted it to. A surprised Hiroya was ordered by his mentor to destroy the creature. Stopping, Seseki suddenly asked the boy what gave him the idea to look for the main body in the fog. The main character explained that he had already read about all the famous Wazawai and how to defeat them. The example of a hero from the past who had done his best to destroy a previously unknown monster had encouraged him. Hiroya couldn't even guess that that very hero was Saseki. The legendary fighter remembered how inspired he had been during those years and how eager he was to destroy all those monsters. He made a vow to himself then that at the cost of his life he would help humanity and exterminate the Wazawai. Seseki had a hard time remembering this because he had changed a lot since then. The boy noticed his mentor's change in face and asked what was wrong. The number grinned and said that the boy was too annoying. Suddenly, the fog began to clear and the sun was once again visible in the cramped quarters of Yokohama. Looking at a neighborhood of the liberated city, the protagonist remembered the captured advance party he had seen recently. But before he knew it, the street was covered with dozens of gates. Portals appeared in staggering numbers at the least staggering rate. Numbers sadly stated that all these portals were hiding high-ranked monsters. Previously, they couldn't be seen because of the fog. But the worst part was that the monsters were only seconds away from coming. Barely had the heroes regained their senses as dozens of giant-sized Wazawai appeared in front of them. They had originally not counted on such a large number of high-class monsters. Unexpectedly, Hiroya, Saseki sighed heavily and said that he was getting too annoyed by all this. He prepared to use his ability, which looked much stronger this time. In the next instant, a powerful blast of aura enveloped Saseki. It was nothing like Hiroya had expected to see. He was bathed in a bright light from the colossal release of energy. The ability Hiroya had never heard of before was called Sekirin Kaiku. Seseki told his student that he was just doing it because he was annoyed by the whole thing, so the guy better watch carefully and not blink. Hiroya had never heard of skills being additionally awakened. Rather, his mentor was a truly legendary figure. His appearance made one tremble before him, and his aura dazzled with its mere sight. Unwilling to wait for one of the monsters, it directly attacked Saseki. Seeing this, the protagonist decided to warn his mentor. However, the monster managed to reach the protective aura, after which his body literally vaporized before his eyes. For a moment, there was no trace left of the huge insect. Such a colossal, previously unseen power made the guy afraid. He had only experienced this kind of awe before when he saw Mugen. What he saw also made the demon cheer up. It was likely that he had finally found a worthy opponent. Dozens of different creatures pounced on the number in the same instant. Hiroya tried to reason with his mentor, shouting that there were too many of them. But Saseki only waved his finger once, and all the monsters stopped. After that, a key appeared next to each keyhole seal. With another wave of his finger, Saseki activated the next ability, which caused all the monsters to shatter into small pieces. Hiroya watched silently, unable to say a word. Amidst the pieces of monsters' bodies falling from the sky, he caught the gaze of his mentor. The protagonist assumed that number. 4 had never unleashed the full potential of Nomer in the fight with him yesterday. If that was Nomera's actual power, then he originally had no chance of winning. Suddenly, Saseki's face changed drastically and once again began to say that he was tired. Falling to the ground, the hero started crying that he couldn't do anything else and asked the guy to call a helicopter here. Hiroya enthusiastically ran up to his mentor, saying that he had never seen anything cooler and started asking what that ability was. He tried to ask Number if he could replicate it, to which he received the answer that under no circumstances would he be able to master the technique. Saseki then added that he shouldn't underestimate Gnome, which finally put the boy in a stupor. Putting a hand under his head, the mentor noted that it was not his original plan to show this ability to anyone. Suddenly, his calmness was replaced by irritation again, and he shouted that such an intense battle had caused him muscle pains, appendicitis, and aggravated hemorrhoids. Grinning, Hiroya reminded him that his mentor had hardly moved during the fight. Saseki stopped shouting then and stared pensively at the sky. He remembered asking Inui recently if it was really a good idea to unleash such abilities. In that conversation, Saseki had tried to refuse to demonstrate this power. He didn't want to let any boy be dragged into this matter. The leader of the numbers then stated that unicum would surely want to be in the know. Saseki abruptly cut his interlocutor short, saying that the kid couldn't possibly want it without even knowing about it. Inui responded by noting that someone as lazy as Saseki is rarely that persistent. The leader of the room offered as a compromise to do what he asked, and in return, Saseki would get a week's worth of assignments excused. So worthless an offer, Saseki took it with aggression. Sensing this, Inui told his partner that his daughter would surely be happy if her father took more time with her. Sasaki sighed heavily as he realized he didn't have much of a choice. Scratching his head, he agreed to the deal. Lying down in front of his apprentice, he said that it would take at least 10 years for him to realize this ability. But Hiroya was not surprised at all. He shouted that he was willing to work hard to become stronger. Despite what he said, the protagonist realized that it was unlikely that he would be able to master this skill, because even now he was fighting not because of his own strength but because of the monster's strength. Suddenly, the mentor reminded his subordinate that he still had the skill. Those words sounded strange considering what Number had already managed to see. However, the guy confirmed it. Throughout this conversation, the protagonist did not see the unusual ravens circling above them. These creatures were no ordinary birds. Their vision was controlled by a second number named Meikyo Kurusu. Standing behind Inui, he said that everything was going according to his plan. The leader of the numbers, who had seen the entire fight from start to finish, said that, as expected, this kid had the skill. Kurusu, in turn, replied that showing some brat, Sekirin Kaiku, was reckless. This ability has been hidden from both the government and the people for years. Its revelation to the world could upset the world's balance of power. Inui laughed at what was said and repeated the old line about how they shouldn't become Prometheus, who gives fire to mankind. But he reminded his partner that the man who had consumed the Wazawai had returned again. Looking at the chained figure, Inui added that time, which had stopped that day, had begun to move again. With the battle successfully completed, the heroes returned to the head office. Lying in the cart, Sasaki exclaimed about not wanting to go anywhere. His student, whom he had forced to behave, urged the teacher to stop complaining when someone else was doing his work for him. Constantly arguing with each other, they made their way to Seika Inui's room. Suddenly, the door opened and number 13 stepped out of it. Without changing his facial expression, he walked past the protagonist and whispered that he didn't lose. Knowing their situation, Sasaki noted that Hiroya seemed to be causing a lot of trouble for Kusanagi-Kei, and the boy needed to be careful. However, he wanted a rematch with the upstart himself. Following the door opened, Inui showed up and said that he had been waiting for them for quite some time. He praised the two rankers for a mission well done. Standing next to the leader of the room was an unusual girl in a white robe and with a bow on her head. The stunned protagonist ran up to her and shouted in her face that she was a number 8 named Ojuan Kasaki. Suddenly, she grabbed the guy's face and said his name. She then moved closer and licked his cheek. The main character immediately jumped aside and screamed. He embarrassedly asked the girl what she had just done. She replied by saying that it really did taste like wazawai. Without letting him ask another question, Kasaki ordered the boy to show his status. With a smirk, she glanced at the kid's card. The girl stated that it was no wonder some idiots took it as a weakness. She said that the dash in the skill column was not a weakness, and it was just a disadvantage. Not understanding anything, the protagonist asked her what she meant. Kasaki irritatedly said that idiots really don't make conversation with idiots. Number 8 explained that minus in this situation meant cancel. This skillet allows its wielder to reduce the Wazawai's power to 0. The protagonist again tried to ask another question, but immediately received a scathing slap. When the leader of the numbers said that there must be some way to activate this skill, as an example of its use, it could be a situation in which the wielder of the ability received lethal damage. But the main function of this ability, according to Inui, was to help suppress the inner demon of the protagonist. Hiroya realized that he had had the skillet all these 6 years and had been using it constantly. It turns out that if all this time he had known about how to use this ability, he could have avoided all this humiliation. The realization of this truth made the guy cry. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by Kasaki, who said that she didn't like speculation and the guy needed to be dissected to confirm it. Hearing the last word, the guy was scared out of his wits and stepped back again. Before he knew it, a foot suddenly came out of number 8's mouth. The first leg was followed by the second and then the arms. After finishing expelling the entire body, the girl wiped her mouth and said that it was beautiful. Right in the middle of the room lay an exact replica of the main character. Such a horrible ability made the guy scream exhaustedly. In addition, now everyone present could safely see him naked. The girl was surprised that the brat hadn't been told that her ability was reproduction. She could read biological information and create dolls. They were not alive, but their tissues were similar to human ones. Saseki once again remarked that this ability was in very bad taste. Kisaki responded by saying that she was feeling nostalgic for Saseki's autopsy. The man immediately fell to his knees and said that it was torture for him to watch his body being cut open. With tears in his eyes, he assured his student that it was not something worth watching. She said with relish that she couldn't wait to dissect the man who had consumed the Wazawai. Suddenly, the puppet raised its hand and grabbed the girl by the throat. The figure's image changed to demonic. The inhuman voice ordered Kisaki to stop touching it so carelessly. The protagonist of The Strong was surprised that a piece of Mugen's mind had been recovered along with his body. Kisaki was not confused, and in the next moment chopped the hand into pieces. Taking the doll by the hair, she dragged it to another room, adding that she would report the results later. Looking at how carelessly his copy was being dragged, the guy thought he could have been a little more delicate. Inui said that it was hard for Kisaki to find free time, but he insisted that it was about the hope of humanity. He explained that humans and Wazawai are different sides of the same process, but it was Hiroya who, by taking the best of both races, would be able to surpass them. It was because of his faith in the lad that Inui ordered Seseki to demonstrate the Sekirin Kaiku ability. However, this technique is secret and only available to the numbers. Nevertheless, he believed that the lad would be able to rise through the ranks in no time. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a violent jolt. The number leader's face was suddenly distorted by panic. He felt extremely pressurized. Walking over to the window, Inui punched it, adding that he hoped it wasn't the monster that attacked 6 years ago. Trying to ward off suspicion, Hiroya reminded him that the monster had been destroyed then. Inui replied that that was just the official version, and in fact that Wazawai had simply disappeared. Just when the protagonist thought he should tell the whole truth, Inui looked at him and said that as soon as he saw the creature that had killed his beloved, he would immediately destroy it. The boy's eyes filled with fear. Mugen, who had been watching this conversation, laughed evilly. He realized that now was the perfect opportunity for Togo to switch. But at that moment, a staff member of the association suddenly ran into the room and shouted that a gate he had never seen had opened. The meter on that gate was showing an extremely huge 1-year period, something that hadn't happened in 6 years. Upon hearing this news, Inui sadly announced that they had 1 year to prepare for a disaster-rank Wazawai attack. Exhaling sadly, Seseki stated that one problem was being replaced by another, as usual. Inui then turned to Hiroya, saying that they didn't seem to have time to celebrate. At this point, the protagonist became much more serious and promised his idol that he would definitely become a nomer. 1 year has passed since the protagonist, along with his new mentor, saved Yokohama from the mysterious fog. The city center was worried. A man was prodding his companions, saying that they had finally beaten out their seats on the train. Along the way, he chided them that they needed to get out of here immediately or they wouldn't survive an incident like the one 7 years ago. Suddenly, the city's public address sirens blared. As several people looked fearfully at the loudspeaker, a portal opened behind them. In the next second, a Wazawai crawled out of it, immediately attacking the pedestrians who had lost their guard. The people scattered to the sides, and a few moments later, a bright light flashed in the sky. Then, something with great speed slammed into the monster's body. The smoke cleared and everyone saw a Wazawai hunter who, with one blow, cut a huge hole in the monster's body. When asked by the people around him who he was, the guy replied that he could not be mentioned. Lastly, he said that he was glad that everyone had been saved. A loud voice behind him ordered the boy to keep pulling the cart. Enraged, Hiroya asked his teacher to stop exploiting the locals. Seseki added that they had better hurry up as Inui was already waiting for them. The protagonist agreed with his teacher and raised his eyes to the sky. It had been a whole year since he had been in the ranks of the rankers. After a while, they reached Inui's office. There they were met by Shizuka, who informed them that the leader of the numbers was not present at the moment. In desperation, the boy stated that Inui had called him to this very place. To this, Shizuka replied that number 1 was waiting for him somewhere else entirely. As they walked downstairs, the girl questioned the boy about his recent trip to America to kill another Wazawai. Hiroya said that it had gone well and without any trouble. Shizuka also noticed that the guy's physique had improved a lot over the past year. Finally, they descended a dark room with a bright light at the end of the hallway. The girl explained that this was the numbers training ground. This is also where they test the strength of the nom candidates. Farther into the room, Hiroya saw his idol, to whom he immediately ran to. Inui at this moment was looking at the characteristics of the protagonist. The guy had managed to rise to 12th place on the list of the world's top rankers. The leader grinned and said that the first thing to do was to see if the boy's skills matched that place. Activating his ability, he turned around to face Hiroya and asked if they should spar. Being serious, Inui suggested they spar until the first blow the protagonist could land on him. He said that it was time for him to show his strength. Hiroya is only more amused by such a suggestion. If his idol allows him to give his full power, then Inui recognized him. For the protagonist, this was one of the best moments of his life. After activating the Infinite Awakening ability, he loudly thanked Inui for this opportunity. At the same moment, the guy seemed to vaporize. Soon, Hiroya attempted a swift strike, which Inui easily dodged. Changing direction in flight, the guy attacked the number leader with a two-handed attack. The first number dodged the blows that would have been hard for the human eye to follow with incredible ease. The speed the boy had achieved over the year had pleasantly surprised Inui. Then he decided to test how good the potential number 1 was at repelling attacks. Realizing that it was his time to defend himself, the protagonist used his minus ability. After blocking a few swift blows from the number leader, he would instantly go on the counterattack. With incredible ease, the protagonist changed the spectrum of his aura from attacking to defending. Over a year of constant training and battles, he had honed this ability to an incredible level. With each passing second, he moved more and more rapidly and caused his opponent more and more trouble. It got to the point that the leader of the numbers had a hard time tracking the changes in Hiroya's abilities. But suddenly, the sword that had been in his opponent's right hand all along suddenly disappeared. At the same moment, he felt the aura of the sword behind his back multiplied. Looking up, he found the blades rushing towards him. Then he abruptly changed the spectrum of the aura, increasing the speed of his feet. Maneuvering swiftly, Hiroya dodged all the blades flying at him from above. However, the kid was so caught up in this that he didn't feel Inui approaching him from behind, who then pierced the kid with his sword. The number leader briefly explained that the protagonist had left his rear hemisphere unprotected. He immediately apologized and then abruptly changed his aura, thus destroying the blade. Lightning fast, he switched back and forth between skills and delivered a crushing blow to Inui, who barely had time to block the attack. The blow was so powerful that the opponents flew to different sides of the court. While still in flight, Hiroya shouted that he didn't mean it. But then he saw that number 1 had managed to activate his shield. However, Inui admitted that he had managed to get hit even before the shield was applied. As he came closer, he offered his hand to the young man and declared that it was an incredible blow. From such praise from his favorite hero, Hiroya was beyond happy. The number leader also noted that the boy had managed to master not only his powers, but also the powers of the Wazawai. Hiroya explained that, for some reason, the monster inside of him had stopped bursting out, and it was as if it had become a part of him. The guy's last words had alarmed Inui. Kisaki had summoned him earlier and told him that she had learned something interesting about this young man. Upon entering the girl's office, the first thing the number leader noticed was the huge pile of the guy's arms and legs. Kisaki laughed and said it was all doll parts that had been rendered unusable. She offered to take a couple souvenirs to her coworker, but he declined. Inui asked her to cut to the chase and tell her about her discovery. To his great dismay, the girl indifferently stated that the boy was no longer human. After a short pause, she succinctly stated that this brat was a Wazawai. Noticing that the teacher had frozen strangely, Hiroya asked what was wrong. Inui replied that everything was fine. He decided that there was no cause for concern for now. Stepping aside a bit, Inui suddenly said that he would really like to know what that demon sitting inside the guy looked like. The protagonist perfectly remembered the words that his idol had said a year earlier. The situation hadn't changed since then. He was not allowed to blabber that the demon that had killed Inui's lover 7 years ago was sitting inside him. Hiroya replied something inaudible. Inui immediately interrupted him, reminding him that the special gate was opening in a week, and he still hadn't completed his task. Hiroya had come very close to obtaining the title of number over the past year, but had never reached it. Inui then ordered the boy to follow him, saying that he would now teach him the main requirement for joining the numbers. Suddenly, a suspiciously familiar voice called out to the protagonist. As it approached, someone asked if the brat was a candidate for some other numbers. Hiroya turned around and jumped back in fear. In front of him stood Kusanagi K, who was already rank 11 at that moment. That was only 1 rank higher than the protagonist. However, the balance of power had changed a lot since then. In addition, after Kazuki Tayo left the team, there was only 1 vacant slot among the numbers. Inui, who had set up this meeting, said that the two of them would now compete for the remaining slot. Without a second's hesitation, the two guys turned around to face each other. Staring intently into each other's eyes, they each declared that they were the only one worthy of becoming a member of the numbers. Numbers is the collective term for the chosen rankers of rank 1 to 10. And the specific goal of Kugami's training this year was to become numbers by raising his rank to 1. But he was unable to do so. Was Kusanagi K, the current rank 11, the reason behind it? K suddenly turned around and asked what he was staring at. Kugami quickly denied that he was staring. Standing with pride, he said that he cannot allow himself to be surpassed by Kugami, who just started climbing the ladder to the top recently. While looking down on him, Kei further mentioned that he will be the first one to master Sekirin Kaiku and become a numbers. Kei kept looking at him silently, not speaking a word. They were descending deep down. Kei remembered about Seiseki-san's Sekirin Kaiku called Ki King being too overpowered. He got all excited about thinking that he is currently going to learn a power-up method like that. The elevator kept descending further, so he wondered how much longer he had to wait before reaching his destination. They finally arrived at their destination. There was a very huge gate in front of them. The gate opened, radiating a bright green light. Inui asked both of them to be careful ahead, as what lay ahead was not known to many, and only a few numbers and limited government officials knew. It was a national, secret-level existence. Both of them were surprised to see what was in front of them. There was a giant figure of something half human and half divine, restrained with chains, and the entire place was relatively small compared to her. Inui told them that she is a Wazawai. Her name is Eden, who was once human. Kei told them she reminded him of someone he knew, saving up about her past and who she really is for another time. He mentioned that the essence of the Sekirin Kaiku skill is bestowed by her. Kugami was shocked when he discovered this fact. Without wasting any further time, Kei told him that he wanted to learn Sekirin Kaiku quickly. He peeked back at Kugami, watching his reaction. Inui kept staring at him silently for a moment. He asked them both to follow him to the staircase. They reached near Eden, and Inui mentioned a ritual called Eden's Blessing, which ritual needed to receive Sekirin Kaiku. Kugami was feeling tremendous life force there, wondering if she was really the source of that power. In Eden's Blessing, one touches Eden's abdomen and gets transported into another dimension, where they need to fight and defeat a certain opponent, and this is the only condition to master the skill. Kugami questioned about the opponent, asking if it is a Wazawai, or rather Eden herself, further asking about the mechanism. Hearing his questions, Inui smiled, telling him the opponent he must defeat is himself. He will need to fight and overcome himself, and as proof of surpassing, he will receive the skill. Kugami couldn't really understand what he said. While the answer didn't really affect Kei much, as he thought it was a classic cliché. While moving his hand to touch Eden's abdomen, Kei asked whether he could just touch it as he was in a hurry. Inui warned him. Well, why is Sekirin Kaiku treated as a numbers test because not everyone can endure it? As getting defeated by themselves would mean death. Kugami asked him if he would really die if he failed. Inui asked them if they were thinking this test was cruel, telling them a few philosophical words. Even if this is as far as they go, they are trying to save humanity, and it can't be saved with words alone. Kugami started sweating, thinking about what step he should take now. It again didn't affect Kei much, as he doesn't really care about such things. Even more, he didn't care about humanity at all. He reached out his hand and told Inui that he would become strong enough to challenge him. He finally touched Eden's abdomen. The next moment, he was completely gone. He was swallowed inside. Inui praised him for being fearless as always. It was not Kugami's turn. He couldn't decide yet and wondered what even Eden is. Inui's words kept echoing in his mind. From behind, he heard someone telling him to give up if he didn't want to. He turned back and saw it was Saseki. Inui asked him what he was doing in a place like this. He had heard about the stuff of being humanity's hope, calling it all rubbish, trying to motivate Kugami. He called him a coward, a crybaby, someone who wets their bed rather than being humanity's hope. He told him that he was just a little citizen with a bit stronger sense of justice and kindness than others. Kugami cried into tears. While crying, he corrected Saseki, that he has never wet his bed, to which Saseki looked at him suspiciously. He wiped out his tears, saying it would be an interesting story about a little citizen trying to save humanity. He apologized to Saseki, saying he won't quit. Saseki started throwing tantrums at him, saying he won't be babysitting him anymore, and he doesn't even care about what happens next, asking him to do whatever he wants. As he walked away, Inui reminded Saseki about another mission. Saseki replied that he was heading for it now, acting as if he had completely forgotten that such a mission even existed. Saseki walked away, being annoyed at both of them. Kugami didn't speak loudly, but in his mind he thanked him for motivating him. Kugami, finally, all motivated, touched Eden's abdomen. Meanwhile, Kei finally arrived on the other side. It was all misty around him when he reached there. He was standing in a place that somewhat looked like a stadium stage, surrounded by a lot of weapons shoved into the ground, probably remnants of other battles that occurred here. He noticed someone amidst that mist. He saw himself standing opposite him. He looked almost similar in appearance, the only thing different being the color of his eyes. They spoke at the same time, their voices overlapping as they asked what was wrong with the other. They further, at the same time, showed dislike of each other's faces. Real K didn't like what was happening. He tried to use his skill, but he realized his skills don't work here. Meanwhile, the fake one could use the same skill, and they both rushed towards each other. It was too late for the real one to stop. An explosion occurred due to this skill. K's right hand started bleeding, and he finally understood the true meaning of this trial. He tasted the blood on his hand. With a cold smile, he called this trial interesting. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Kugami appeared covered everywhere with mist. He looks at where he got teleported to. It was completely different from K's. The ground was blood red in color, with probably a dragon or dinosaur's fossils lying there. He wondered where he was. Someone came up behind him and said he was glad to see him come on his own. He smiled ominously, telling him, "It's been a while." He was shocked to see it was Mugen. Meanwhile, on the outer side, there was a gate that had been open for around a week. It was a special grade gate sealing mission. Well, further delaying the mission wouldn't be good, but if even one person, including his only daughter's damage, can be spared from damage, then this might be worth doing. Even if it is a special grade, taking it lightly could cost Saseki his life. He powered up, bringing up his special ability with a serious look on his face. He says that he must get serious now, as his student is working hard too. Back to where Kugami was, he is still confused seeing Mugen there. He asked Mugen why he was there. He told him he heard the story about how to master Sakirin, something about how he must defeat himself. He stressed the word himself, laughing ominously as he asked if he had really forgotten who was dwelling within him. He took a humanoid form and told him that Kugami must defeat him now. Kugami was pushed back by the force coming from Mugen. He tried to use his skill, but he couldn't. Mugen, spreading out his arms, said he can't use his skills in this space. He laughed more crazily, telling Kugami now he must defeat him without skills. He laughed again, complimenting Kugami's expression. Mugen leaned close to his face and asked if he should simply let him win. Kugami, still confused, asked him again what he had just said. Mugen offered him a deal, saying he had no reason to stop him. Since they shared the same body, it would be more convenient anyway. He added that Kugami couldn't beat him regardless, claiming he could see straight through his inner thoughts. Just as Mugen said that Kugami must be feeling relieved, Kugami suddenly punched him in the face. His gaze turned cold, and he stopped laughing. With anger clear on his face after hearing that offer, Kugami told Mugen to come at him with everything he had. Mugen started laughing sinisterly again, saying he would kill him for rejecting such a generous offer. The scene shifted to the place where Eden was restrained, while Mr. Inui calmly enjoyed his tea. He asked Shizuka how long it had been since they entered, and she replied that it had been 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 20 seconds. He praised the tea she made, not realizing how quickly time had passed because of its taste. While slowly sipping from his cup, he said it would probably take much more time. Suddenly, he realized someone was standing behind him. It was K. He wasn't badly injured. Only the sleeve on his right side was torn. He stood there calmly, as if nothing had happened. Defeating a full-spec version of himself under the restriction of using no skills would not have been an ordinary trial, even for someone like K. Still, it wasn't a big deal for him, since he figured out the condition of the trial almost immediately, though he thought it would be much harder for Kugami. He asked Inui if, now that he had completed the trial, he was finally a numbers member. Inui calmly replied that this was not a competition, and there was a chance that neither of them might survive. However, if Kugami failed to return, K would become a numbers member. K then asked what would happen if Kugami also mastered Sekirin Kaiku and came back. Smiling while holding his teacup, Inui said they would think about that when the time came. He stood up and wondered what Kugami might be doing inside. Meanwhile, inside the trial, Kugami was still fighting Mugen. He kept punching him repeatedly, but Mugen didn't budge even an inch. Kugami jumped up while spinning rapidly. He kicked Mugen's head as he tried to land. Even then, Mugen endured every attack. His eyes glowed red, and a strange blue aura surrounded him. It was as if all the attacks were being neutralized. This had to be the power of the skill minus, which could cancel skills or Wazawai powers. Kugami felt uneasy, wondering how Mugen had mastered this skill in such a short time. Suddenly, the silhouette of a massive monster-like hand appeared above him. Mugen's hand was wrapped in a dangerous aura as it formed into a gigantic arm. He slammed the arm down onto the ground. He laughed again when he saw Kugami lying there, saying it wasn't over yet. Kugami lay on the ground, his body split into two halves at the abdomen. With an even more twisted smile, Mugen raised his hand toward him and used the skill minus. Both halves of Kugami's body were connected again. Shocked to find himself alive, Kugami crawled backward as Mugen walked toward him. Mugen raised his hand to attack once more. This time, Kugami was killed a second time. That still wasn't enough for Mugen. He used minus again, and killed him once more. 218. He repeated the process again and again. Mugen praised the skill. Minus, calling it extremely convenient. Kugami hadn't known minus could be used this way. He thought he had developed the skill through training, but Mugen's usage felt like magic from another dimension. Still wanting to play, Mugen asked what other powers Kugami could use. Kugami told him he would never forgive him for using such a skill for fun. That skill was meant for saving and protecting people. Mugen disliked hearing that and asked what kind of restriction that was. He said that by limiting the scope of the skill, Kugami could only see it as a defensive technique. He would now demonstrate its true potential, telling him to crawl and watch. Mugen's right hand began glowing red. His left hand began glowing blue. He merged both his hands, creating an even stronger attack. This was something that had never crossed Kugami's mind. Mugen was canceling his own attack using the minus skill. Kugami remained there, unable to stand, staring at Mugen. The cancelled power suddenly vanished from Mugen's hands and reappeared behind Kugami. Mugen gave one final warning, saying that such power was not something to be used lightly, because in this world, nothing truly ever returned to nothing. It was a simple truth, one that anyone could understand if they stopped and thought about it for a moment. Mugen finally unleashed the massive orb toward Kugami. Saseki's words echoed in Kugami's mind, telling him that he still lacked imagination. In a flashback, Kugami asked what imagination meant, and Saseki replied that Kugami's life was filled with despair, believing he had no skill, and that if he improved his imagination, he would finally be able to transform. Kugami fell into an endless green abyss, thinking he could still grasp something and that he could not die yet. He reached out his hands as he was not someone who would simply give up. Eden appeared behind him as he continued falling. She called Kugami indomitable. Through that indomitable spirit, she said, he would achieve true awakening, and she caught him in her palms. A bright flame appeared in front of Mugen. He was surprised by the sight of the fire. Standing before him was Kugami, who had just unleashed his Sekirin Kaiku, Kagen Jugo, Phantom Purification. Mugen could not believe it. Kugami had awakened his own Sekirin Kaiku. Kugami's body began turning into bubbles as he passed the trial. He vanished from that place. Mugen did not look pleased. Still confused about why he had let the boy win, he brushed it off, thinking it was fine. The stronger Kugami became, the more nourishment it would provide for Mugen. Mugen looked at Eden and said he never expected to meet her in a place like this, calling it nostalgic and asking how she had been. Meanwhile, in the real world, Kugami appeared before Inui and Kei. He slowly opened his eyes. Both of them stared at Hiroya. Hiroya seemed dazed, unable to believe that he had truly passed the trial. He ran toward Inui, filled with happiness, saying that he had learned and mastered Sekirin Kaiku. Inui began patting his head. He congratulated him as he did so. Inui smiled gently and told him that he had worked very hard, causing Kugami to grow a little emotional at his words. Unhappy, Kei asked why he had not received even a single word of congratulations. He complained angrily that Inui was playing favorites, saying it was unfair since he maintained rank 11 and should have been praised more. Yet Saseki had been assigned as Kugami's mentor, and Inui kept paying him extra attention. Kugami turned toward Kei, wondering why he was so angry. Then it hit him. He understood this reaction. It was jealousy. Watching Kei while he spoke to Inui, Kogami realized that he also wanted to be recognized and found himself comparing Kei to his own feelings. He extended his hand toward Kei and said that they should keep working hard together. Kei, however, looked down at him and asked why he was acting so annoying. Annoyed, Kei asked what they were supposed to do now that their battle to the death was over and they had survived after mastering Sekirin. Hiroya replied that this was exactly what he had been hoping for. Suddenly, an announcement came in saying that Saseki was on a mission and required reinforcements. Inui confirmed that Saseki was currently at a special grade gate, but to their surprise, a special grade calamity had appeared. He wondered if something had happened there that forced Saseki to activate his Sekirin Kaiku. There was no point in speculating further. Kugami asked Inui for permission to rush to the gate's location immediately. Inui smiled and remarked that Kugami had become reliable. He immediately asked Shizuka to make preparations, but everything had already been completed without him needing to ask. It was Shizuka's skill, called guiding door or Jadu door. It worked like an anywhere door. Think of a place you want to go, and you would arrive there. The same thought crossed Kugami's mind, and he compared it to an anywhere door. They all stepped inside the door. The door appeared directly in front of the special grade gate. When Inui and Kei arrived, they saw many corpses scattered across the ground. They were the rankers who had been accompanying Saseki. As expected, the traces of a special grade were different, but the appearance and the gate's countdown system were similar to ordinary gates. Even so, Inui remarked that for Saseki to activate his skill against an opponent meant this calamity was far from ordinary. He wondered what on earth had happened here. Kei stood there silently, observing the scene. He searched for Kugami, but he was nowhere to be seen. Since they had entered through the same door at the same time, where could Kugami have gone? Then they realized that Kugami might have thought of a different destination and ended up somewhere else. Kugami had already been teleported inside the gate where Saseki was. In front of him, he saw two figures locked in battle. It was Saseki fighting a strange monster with no organs below the torso and multiple tentacles in place of arms. Saseki was struggling against the creature. Kugami wondered what kind of calamity it was as he observed it closely. The monster looked ominous, as if all the horrors of the world had taken form. His mind refused to accept its existence, overwhelmed by fear. But he realized this was not the time to be afraid, as Saseki was fighting alone. Knowing he had to help somehow, Kugami rushed toward him. However, he was blocked by invisible chains and locks. It was Saseki's lock skill, keeping him away. Saseki told Kugami not to come closer, warning him that it was dangerous and that he could handle it alone. The monster appeared to be a special grade, but it had not yet reached its complete form. That meant it was still possible to defeat it, and Saseki unleashed another attack. The monster screamed that it could not move, claiming it was completely restrained. Laughing, it praised Saseki's skill as SSR ranked and thanked him as if pretending to be trapped. It spoke eagerly about human skills, calling itself a player and likening the world to a gacha game, boasting about receiving 10 free pulls as a login bonus. It complained that most of the skills it found were garbage. Still, it openly admired Saseki's skill, calling it divine and powerful. Kugami was confused, unable to understand the strange references the monster was making. Saseki grew irritated. Even while locked, the monster would not stop talking. Its high intelligence and learning ability marked it as a true special grade calamity. Still, Saseki was relieved that his skill had successfully restrained it, even as blood began to seep from his nails. When he pushed further, the bleeding worsened. Encouraged by Saseki's strength, Kugami cheered for him from the side. Saseki then prepared a sure hit technique with zero chance of missing. The technique was called Bumping Unlock. For a moment, it seemed as though the monster had been defeated. Suddenly, the monster pierced straight through Saseki's chest with its bare hand. Saseki coughed up blood, his body going limp as if he were already dead. He collapsed to his knees, and the monster's arm returned to its body. Laughing, it casually apologized, saying it could have stopped its hand if it wanted to. At that moment, Kugami was consumed by an indescribable emptiness. Desperately, he tried to break the chains restraining him. He activated his minus skill and canceled them. He could think of nothing else. All he wanted was to save Saseki. Enraged, he charged toward where Saseki was kneeling. Another lock appeared in his path. It failed to stop him, as he broke through the chains once again. In a desperate attempt to stop him, Saseki used an even stronger lock to keep Kugami out of the fight. Kugami shouted, asking why he would not let him fight and help. In a painful voice, Saseki told him it was good that he had mastered Sekirin Kaiku. He admitted that he had not been a good master and was not cut out for the role. Even so, he asked Kugami to grant him one final request. He told him to run, saying this was not the place to burn away his life. Tears filled Kugami's eyes as he heard those words. The monster began to spread its jaws. It was preparing to devour Saseki. Just before it could, Kugami forced his way in and punched the monster. The blow was so powerful that the monster was sent flying backward. Kugami was engulfed in a mysterious red aura, and the monster stared in disbelief, wondering how a mere human could do this to him. He promised himself that he would save Seseki. He unleashed his Sekirin Kaiku, Kagen Jugo, and the entire place was engulfed in flames. He warned the monster that he was going to kill him. The monster laughed ominously, saying he had received 2 divine skills in a single 10 pull. Kei sensed something unusual. He could feel the pressure of someone using Sekirin Kaiku, but it was too far away. Inui finished issuing the emergency request to the numbers. Kei replied, asking if they even needed more numbers than just him and Inui. Glancing at Kei, Inui said that subduing special calamities was the true purpose of the numbers, and as long as there was a possibility of an opponent being a special calamity, they had to act accordingly. They both headed to their destination by traveling through the door. Shizuka told them to be careful. The scene returned to the battle, where Kugami was in his Sekirin form. He told Seiseki that he would save him and kill the monster. With a troubled look, Seiseki called Kugami an idiot. The monster continued laughing. It suddenly began attacking with many tentacle-like fists. However, the attacks could not even scratch Kugami, as he used the minus skill as a shield to block every tentacle. The monster wondered why it could not do anything to him. This skill was called Flowery Illusion Purification. In other words, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. It was an extended version of the original skill called minus. Even though Kugami had just acquired it, it felt as if it had already been installed within him. He activated the version called plus, and a few blue tentacles appeared behind him. The tentacles began crawling up his arm. He then unleashed the attack toward the monster, which looked very similar to the monster's own skill. The monster shouted at Kugami not to use his attacks without permission. It attacked again with all its tentacles, declaring that unauthorized use of its skills was unforgivable. The 2 attacks collided. However, the monster was losing against its own power, something it had never imagined. Kugami kept his gaze fixed on him while continuously attacking with the tentacles. He then used another version of the skill called times. He extended his hand, and all the tentacles spiraled in the direction he pointed. The tentacles multiplied into countless numbers, completely surrounding the monster. The monster tried to escape the tornado formed by the overwhelming mass of tentacles. It mocked Kugami, saying that people called him gloomy because of his bad personality. However, even if Kugami tried to capture the monster, it would not be that easy. With Kugami's back exposed, the monster extended its arm to strike him from behind. Seiseki quickly warned Kugami. It was the same arm the monster had detached earlier to pierce Seiseki from behind. There were no cowardly excuses in a fight where both sides risked their lives. This was a battle for survival. But if the monster was willing to fight one against many, Kugami activated his skill divide. Suddenly, the arm attacking from behind was grabbed by another hand. The monster froze in confusion. It was no longer 1 against 1. Hundreds of Kugami's clones now surrounded him. In silence, everyone watched the scene unfold. Even Seiseki was surprised to see him use such a skill. The monster panicked and called the move cowardly. Kugami told him he was the last person he wanted to hear those words from and attacked together with all his clones. The monster started screaming, knowing he could not do anything anymore. The scream was so loud that it could be heard from far away. The blue tentacles had completely grabbed him, making him unable to speak. He could only scream faintly. Kugami had managed to do what his master could not. While watching him, Seiseki realized that not only Kugami's skill, but also his judgment in different situations had improved. He asked for help with pride as his student had, in a way, surpassed him. Kugami's fist began to glow red. He warned the monster that he was going to kill him. A monstrous life form appeared from the red aura oozing out of his fist. The monster could clearly see it. He understood that the power Kugami was using did not belong to him, but to someone inside him. Inui approached from behind along with Kei. Praising Kugami for suppressing the monster so well, they offered their help to finish it off there. Coldly, Kugami told them not to interfere. He said that he would be the one to kill the monster. Kei showed an unhappy expression, while Inui did not say a word. The monster desperately asked the spirit inside Kugami for help. He kept begging for help to stop the attack, or else he would be killed. He claimed that if he died, the calamity's goal would be delayed. A large explosion occurred in the area. The monster's body was half burned, and he was shocked to find himself still alive. Kugami questioned him about the calamity's goal he had just mentioned. With a completely enraged expression, he demanded an answer immediately. He warned him that he would make it quick and painless if he answered. Kugami urged him to hurry, saying it would soon be too late anyway, and the monster replied that he would tell everything if Kugami spared him. Suddenly, disturbances appeared in the portal gate. Tentacle-like structures began emerging from inside it. They slowly formed into hand-shaped structures. The hands sped up and lunged toward Kugami. The monster had been stalling to buy time for those reinforcements to appear. The arms completely surrounded Kugami. Inui wondered where those arms were even coming from. He did not realize when the arms began tying Kugami up. Kugami saw that his limbs were already bound before he could react. The monster started regenerating his lost parts. Kugami quickly glanced back at him. Even more arms approached from above. Sasaki was deeply troubled seeing his student in such a condition. Suddenly, a shining blade appeared. It sliced apart one of the monster's arms. Another arm was blasted to pieces. Someone was using a game controller to trigger explosions that destroyed the arms. The monster was shaken to his core as all his arms were destroyed in an instant by 3 unknown attackers. They all landed on the ground. The muscular man asked Inui if the monster was a special grade. Inui felt relieved that everyone had come to help. Kei, however, was not pleased to see the other numbers there. The boy with a lollipop in his mouth was Ukabori Manabu, rank 6 of the numbers. He asked why the special grade was already on its last legs after he had gone through the trouble of sneaking out of cram school. The muscular man was Kuritsu Tsuyoshi, rank 7 of the numbers. He mocked Ukibori, saying that like a child, he should never let his guard down until the very end, as they never know what might happen. Ukibori felt sad being scolded by someone with a lower rank than him, while the other man in a cap seemed to have communication troubles. He spoke only 2 words, unpleasant and gold sphere. The man wearing the cap was Long Warren, rank 3 of the numbers. Kiritsu asked Ukibori what Long had just said. Ukibori translated it, explaining that he had said testicles in Chinese and that it was gross. Kiritsu immediately regretted asking. Ukibori asked Kiritsu whether the person standing in front of them was the one who had gone on a rampage with Kei at the Numbers Association, mocking him by saying that he looked stronger. Kiritsu thought for a moment and said maybe. Then he suddenly turned his head and asked why Ukibori always dragged him into everything. Ukibori smiled like a child and said that he himself was basically the weakest of the numbers, and that Saseki had been content with being number 9, so he didn't really care much. And Ukibori then wondered what had happened to Saseki. Kiritsu frowned upon hearing his words. Inui tried to calm Kugami, saying that he understood his feelings about defeating that monster with his own power. He wanted him to understand the weight they carried on their backs, the countless lives lost that day, and all the lives still living now. This was the burden resting on their shoulders. Kugami remained calm for a little while. From that point onward, they would work together. They stood together, declaring that they would use all their strength to kill the special grade calamity. The monster seemed even happier, as if it had found multiple SSRs in a 10-pull. It tried to escape from them. It wanted to defeat them all, but it couldn't be picky with its life on the line. It said that this finally concluded its show, as the arms that had been destroyed began regenerating again. The moment it tried to escape, those regenerated arms began attacking them. Kugami furiously warned it not to even try escaping. The monster began approaching Saseki, who was completely helpless and leaning against a tree. Unable to move, Saseki could only watch as it drew closer. One of its tentacles extended towards Saseki. The tentacle began entering his mouth. Inui and Kei were still bound in place. Kugami couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was as if Saseki had risen from the dead, floating in place. The monster had completely taken over Saseki. One of his eyes turned black, with the iris glowing red. Everyone was shocked, as no one had expected the monster to take over Saseki's body. It was the same as Kugami. The monster said this first experience felt extremely good. It used Saseki's skill to lock everyone in place. No one was able to break free from the chains binding them. It then smiled ominously and asked if it should try that special move. Everyone immediately understood which special move it was referring to. It was Saseki's one-shot, one-kill move, Babin Ping. Things were turning worse by the second. At this rate, they would be completely annihilated. Inui began visualizing a future where all of them were dead. Fortunately, the locks and chains were cancelled by Kugami's minus skill. The 3 numbers couldn't believe they had been saved by someone like Kugami. Kugami asked where Saseki was. He was already flying above them, saying that he had underestimated them slightly. He told them that he must take his leave now, as he wanted to lie low for a while and wait for the day the gate fully opened. He declared that his name was Jiren, and that he looked forward to meeting them again next time, in his complete form. However, there was no way Kugami would let him leave so easily. His left hand was covered in Mugen's red aura. He extended his Mugen arm, trying to grab Jiren before he could escape. Inui noticed something was off about Kugami. For a moment, he completely forgot about Jiren escaping and kept staring at Kugami instead. The hand was just about to grab Jiren inside Saseki's body. Jiren smiled at him and said, "Farewell." In the end, Kugami grabbed nothing. Jiren escaped. The Mugen-like appearance slowly faded away. Kugami's expression was no longer shocked or sad. He completely lost control after losing his master. He knelt on the ground and screamed Saseki's name. A day after the special grade calamity incident, a few numbers gathered for a meeting. Inui briefed the numbers who were not present about the incident involving Saseki and Jiren. At present, his whereabouts were completely unknown. It was clearly their defeat, as they had mishandled the initial response from the very beginning. Ukibori yawned and said that it couldn't be helped, since that man, Saseki, always did things in unexpected ways. With a sly smile on her face, Kanjuin said she herself wanted to experience a special grade calamity someday. She then turned to Kiritsu and asked what kind of appearance Jiren had. Just as he was about to give a long answer, Long murmured something under his breath. Kiritsu described Jiren as an eerie presence, something that felt like it came from another dimension altogether. Even remembering it now frightened him, he said, while covering Long's mouth to stop him from speaking further. Kanjuin casually dismissed his description, calling it boring. Kagurazaka snapped back in anger, saying it was inappropriate for her to talk like that after Kiritsu had given his information so politely. She also added that Inui fighting a special grade calamity alone, without informing the higher-ups, was unacceptable even in an emergency, and warned him not to repeat such actions. She then introduced herself clearly as Kagurazaka Hikari, rank 5 of the numbers. Kurusu remarked that the public would likely call this incident a huge blunder, but he was certain Inui would not let it end like this. Inui replied calmly that they would strike Jiren the moment his pressure was detected. He added that while they continued monitoring the special grade gate, its counter still had 6 days left, meaning Jiren would definitely make another move. Kiritsu questioned how a special grade calamity could appear when the gate was not fully open. Inui explained that Jiren had said he would become whole only when the gate fully opened. He possessed a special ability that allowed him to separate his body, and it was believed he moved using only the parts capable of transferring. If Saseki had been present, he could have locked the counter and bought them more time. Kanjuin asked quietly if Saseki was still alive. Inui replied that Saseki had been in charge of managing that special grade gate. Kiritsu added that Saseki used to lock gates that couldn't be handled immediately, temporarily stopping their countdown, but that particular gate's counter had suddenly started moving all at once yesterday. The room fell silent, shock spreading among them. Since Saseki's skill had been released, it was safe to assume he had passed away. No one spoke for several minutes, the silence weighing heavily on them all. Kiritsu finally muttered that Saseki had remained selfish until the very end. Kurusu said they would hold a memorial for him once the situation was resolved. This was a serious crisis, as all the locked gates across Japan would now begin opening one after another. There were over 1,000 such locations spread throughout the country. Inui decided to assign each number to a specific gate so they could respond immediately to any calamities that appeared. Kiritsu clenched his fist in anger, saying he would go and beat them all to a pulp. Ukibori, meanwhile, still hadn't come to terms with Saseki's passing. Kurusu asked why only a few members were attending the meeting when there were 10 numbers in total. He then asked where Mimimi was, and Inui replied that she had been assigned to another matter. As for the vacant positions, there was some good news. It had been decided that anyone who mastered Sekirin Kaiku would qualify to become a number. Inui invited someone to enter the room. It was Kusanagi Kei, the newly appointed numbers rank 9. Kiritsu extended his hand for a handshake, warning him not to get carried away just because he became a number, though Kei coldly rejected it. Kei said he would surpass Kiritsu soon enough. Ukibori excitedly asked what had happened to Kugami, mentioning that while none of the 4 members could move, he had saved everyone. Kiritsu praised Kugami, saying his pressure was decent and that he had the courage of a strong person. Ukibori asked if Kugami would also become a number, as he wanted to fight alongside him again. Kei stood there watching their reactions, possibly feeling jealous once more. He quietly clenched his fist. Inui explained that Kugami was not present because he had declined the offer to join the numbers. The scene then shifted to another area, showing Kugami still weighed down by Seiseki's death. A bull-like creature suddenly appeared behind him, just as it was about to attack. Kugami clenched his fist as Mugen's red aura flared around him. With a single punch, he completely destroyed the monster, tearing it apart as his hair turned fully red. Mimimi stood nearby, watching him in silence. She noted that this was already the sixth monster he had slain. In a tired, hollow voice, he muttered, "Next," as if he were already exhausted from killing such weak monsters. Mimimi asked him what he truly wanted. He told her to get out of his way, saying he had another gate to head to. She urged him to rest, reminding him that he had been hunting calamities non-stop even after what happened the previous day. She recalled what Inui had told her earlier. When she insisted on hunting calamities herself, Inui had asked her instead to stay with Kugami. He had lost his master right in front of his eyes, and he was clearly depressed. He needed someone to stay by his side, and there was no one who could understand those feelings better than Mimimi. She asked him why he had declined the offer to join the numbers. She told him that Seiseki's death was not his fault. Even if he had defeated that monster back then, the calamity could still have hijacked Seiseki's body. She said this was the truth, and Kugami was shaken for a few seconds after hearing it. She continued, saying that even if he were the strongest man in the world, even if he had defeated that special grade calamity, and even if calamities never existed in the first place, all those ifs were endless, she said angrily. She told him that no matter how much he struggled, Seiseki would not come back because he was already dead. Kugami suddenly jumped forward, trying to attack her. The bubble she had been forming with her chewing gum burst. But he was not attacking her. He was attacking the monster that had appeared behind her. Kugami said that everything Mimimi said was not necessarily true. He asked if anyone had actually seen Seiseki die. He called it all speculation. Mimimi replied that Seiseki's body had been claimed by a calamity, so it would be strange if he were still alive. Kugami interrupted her loudly, saying that he himself was proof of a similar case. He shouted that if someone like him could endure it, then there was no reason Seiseki could not. That was why, no matter what anyone said, he would be the only one who believed in Seiseki. Becoming a number would mean accepting Seiseki's death, and he refused to do that. Mimimi asked why, if that was the case, he was acting so self-destructively. Fighting this recklessly would not help anyone. Kogami replied that he did not know it was Seiseki who had been locking the gates. Everyone's daily lives had been protected because of him. Even if he was a little selfish, he was someone everyone should look up to. For that reason, Kugami said he would not stop. He would keep defeating calamities so that when Seiseki returned, he could welcome him with pride. Mimimi felt emotional, though she tried not to show it. She lightly hit him on the head with a stick, realizing that Kugami was not truly depressed. He still had hope. That was even more reason for him to patrol the gates over a wide area. If he could sense Jiren's pressure, he might finally find his trace. With a hopeful expression, Kugami said that he would definitely find him. Meanwhile, strange laughter echoed from the top of a massive tower. It was Jiren, laughing as he thought about how strong these humans were becoming. The countdown timer had dropped to 4 days and 4 hours remaining. At the Numbers Association, Inui and Kurusu were discussing the situation. Kurusu said it was strange that Inui thought they still had time. Inui replied that they did have time, but he had sent Mimimi and Kugami just in case something appeared at the gate. Kurusu reported that close monitoring was necessary, and according to reports, nearly 300 gates with released locks had already been dealt with. Inui went silent for a moment, thinking deeply. He said he had a certain suspicion about someone, and if it was confirmed, he wondered what he should do if he were in that position. Back at the gate, Kugami and Mimimi stood facing it. She asked what the gate even was, and what was supposed to come out of it. According to Kugami's hypothesis, Jiren had said he would become complete once the gate fully opened. The previous appearance had only been an upper body, so perhaps the rest, like the lower half, would emerge now. They had to stop Jiren from completing himself at any cost. Mimimi kept chewing her gum. She told him to relax a little, warning that acting too furiously could cause him to lose control. Even Inui and Seiseki had handled situations like this with surprising calmness. She shared that she too had once been saved by Inui. At that time, she had wanted to die, but Inui being there saved her. The scene shifted to her memory. She was covered in blood, trembling in shock, as a hand slowly reached out to her. It was Inui's hand. He hugged her and told her to become strong, strong enough to erase her past and weakness. That was why she fought for Inui. Kugami had never known about her past. She then told him to cut his hair, saying his current look made him seem narcissistic. He smiled and laughed. It was the first time he had laughed since that incident, and she told him to keep laughing like that. Suddenly, something began emerging from the gate. Large structures formed into legs that touched the ground. Both of them became alert, thinking it must be Jiren's lower half. But instead, a small cute girl stepped out smiling, and she seemed to know Mimimi. Kugami wondered who the little girl was. Mimimi, however, already knew her. A memory surfaced in her mind. In that flashback, the two of them were playing on swings, laughing together. The girl in the blue dress was Nanami. She had asked Mimimi why she turned down the Numbers Association's recruitment. Mimimi had smiled brightly and said she sent them away because she wanted to protect Nanami. She couldn't even imagine being separated from her because of missions. With a cute smile, Nanami had thanked her. They had promised to be best friends forever. But back then, Mimimi couldn't protect her from the monsters. Nanami stepped closer and said she had wanted to see her all this time, that there was something she wanted to say. Veins began twitching on Nanami's face as she called Mimimi a liar. In the next instant, her lower body had already transformed into a monster. With rage in her voice, she asked if they were still best friends. She screamed in pain and anger, asking if they truly were friends. Then why hadn't Mimimi protected her? Because of that failure, she said, Nanami had died. Mimimi couldn't take it anymore. She broke down and burst into tears. Kugami didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could see that her trauma had taken shape. He realized Jiren must be behind this. Behind them, a strange eye appeared. For Jiren, this situation was troublesome, but standing before the gate allowed him to gain something unexpected. He realized that a human's greatest weakness was the heart. Once the heart was attacked, everything collapsed, because it was fragile. Mimimi cried and apologized to Inui, saying she still wasn't strong enough, just as he once told her. She admitted that she hadn't changed at all from back then. Still crying, she saw the monster about to devour her. Nanami laughed as her image merged with the creature. It was all an illusion. Suddenly, a fist slammed into the monster's face, sending it flying and protecting Mimimi. Of course, Kugami wouldn't let someone die right in front of him. Mimimi slowly stopped crying. There was nothing wrong with being weak. Kugami spoke calmly, saying he once hated his own weakness too. But people became strong by accepting their pain and struggles. In other words, weakness could also be strength. His words reached her heart. And they worked. She finally felt a little lighter. She hadn't expected Kugami to be the one to encourage her. But thanks to him, she felt better now. She thanked Nanami and promised that she would become stronger. Strong enough to never lose anything important to her again. She activated her skill, conductor, and countless musical notes began to swirl around her. Her eyes closed as she focused deeply on her Sakirin Kaiku. A massive spiral of music notes formed behind her. This was her technique, Bloody Requiem. She aimed the notes at Nanami and named the attack Symphony 9. The spiral tore through everything in its path, destroying the fake Nanami completely. The technique was known as Death Parade. Kugami stared in shock, stunned by her power. She laughed and told him that his face looked really funny. The attack had destroyed half of the building. This was her greatest firepower so far. Kugami still couldn't believe it, and said he had heard rumors about her having the title Numbers Firepower Maniac. She smacked him on the head and demanded to know who was spreading such nonsense. She admitted that she had thought Kugami would just be a shy, gloomy introvert. Even Inui had told her that Kugami was humanity's hope. Kugami was bleeding slightly from how hard she hit him. Meanwhile, at the massive tower, Jiren screamed in pain as his lower half lay destroyed. He blamed Kugami, saying that if he hadn't interfered, none of this would have happened. A twisted smile spread across his face as the left side of his head began transforming. He declared Kugami his favorite. Kugami's phone suddenly rang. It was Inui. He answered immediately. Kugami rushed toward Inui's location and asked him to come. Inui didn't turn around. He stood there silently, mourning someone. He received a report that Jiren's other half had been successfully destroyed. Kugami's growth genuinely amazed him. Kugami quickly clarified that it wasn't him, but actually Mimimi who defeated her. Inui smiled faintly, praising her firepower, calling it the strongest among all the numbers. Still, he realized that wasn't the real reason he had been called here. Inui then asked if he remembered this place. It was where a special grade had descended 6 years ago. where he lost someone dear to him but managed to save another. How could Kugami ever forget this place? Of course, he remembered it clearly. He turned toward Inui, anger flickering in his eyes, and demanded to know if the Wazawai inside him was the same special grade from 6 years ago. Kugami could feel something was off. This wasn't the calm, collected Inui he knew. There was a clear, unmistakable intent to kill radiating from him. Inui had lost someone precious that day. Someone who meant everything to him. The very enemy that had taken it all away now stood before him once more. He could still remember that day vividly, the moment he saw the enemy while mourning his loss. And now, after 6 long years, that same enemy stood right in front of his eyes. Flashing back to his earlier conversation with Kurusu, Inui had once asked what he would do if he were in his place. Kurusu gave it some thought. He said that while he might seem calm, he was actually short-tempered and would probably confront them on impulse to demand answers. But as the numbers governor, Inui had to act differently. He was expected to be an example for humanity. Returning to the present, Inui told Kugami that he held no personal grudge against him. It was Inui himself who had allowed him to live and accepted his coexistence with a calamity in the first place. However, it would be an entirely different matter if that calamity turned out to be the special grade from 6 years ago. For the sake of humanity, he would be forced to act. He pointed his skill toward Kugami and asked directly if the calamity inside him was truly that same special grade. The fact that he was even asking made it clear. Inui already knew the answer. What he wanted now was for Kugami to face his pain and respond. Kugami hesitated, wondering what he should say. He was about to tell the truth about the calamity within him, but no words came out. His throat felt locked. Inside his mind, he was grabbed by Mugen. Mugen's hand tightened around his neck, warning him that if he dared to reveal the truth, he'd kill him before Inui could. Mugen smiled and said that if that was the case, then Mugen might as well take over and go on a rampage himself. Mugen coldly asked if that was truly what he wanted. A sudden realization struck Kugami. He understood that hiding the truth about Mugen was the right choice. After all, he had fought and grown stronger with Mugen's power. He was here to protect the world from calamities and to bring Seseki back. He apologized softly to Inui. Then he said that the calamity within him was not a special grade. To prove it, he showed his power, explaining that it had become a part of him now. He promised to create a world free of calamities, and with Inui's help, he would risk everything, his own life, Mugen's power, even his minus skill, to achieve it. That was why he needed Inui's strength. Once his mission was complete, he vowed to sacrifice himself if necessary. He just asked for a little more time to prepare. Inui glared at him, fury burning in his eyes, asking if he was truly siding with a calamity. Kugami panicked, trying to explain himself, but before he could, a familiar voice behind him told him to calm down and stop acting like a child. That voice was one he could never forget. It was Seiseki patting his head gently, calling him hopeless and saying that he still needed him. But something in that voice didn't feel right. There was a tone in it that the real Seiseki would never use. Kugami turned sharply, attacking without hesitation, knowing exactly who it was. The figure grinned, his jaw stretching unnaturally as he revealed himself. It was Jiren. Chains burst out from his hand, wrapping tightly around Kugami. But they couldn't hold him for long. Kugami shattered them using his minus skill. Jiren only smiled, saying that even minus wouldn't stop what was coming next. He raised his hand and activated psychokinesis, causing the floor tiles around them to lift into the air. It was a skill that Seiseki had never possessed. All the tiles shot toward Kugami like a storm of blades. He clenched his fist and tried to punch one aside, but the moment he touched it, the surface turned sticky, and a thick adhesive began to ooze out. It was another one of Jiren's skills. He had used adhesion, causing all the broken tiles to stick tightly to Kugami. In no time, Kugami was buried under a pile of tiles and completely unable to move. Minus could cancel calamity-type skills, but it could not erase real, physical objects. These were skills Jiren had taken from the people he devoured the other day, and he could store them and use them whenever he wanted. Because of this strange ability, Jiren wanted to experience all kinds of skills, but the one that interested him the most belonged to the strongest man among humanity, and that person was standing right in front of him, Inui. Kugami turned and asked how he knew that. Jiren replied that the human brain stored all kinds of information. In other words, he had full control over their information, and the situation was already looking bad, so he warned Inui to be careful. Jiren revealed that he could read minds, and even Mimimi had fallen victim to his mental attack. He tried to pull out emotions like loss, emptiness, and loneliness from Inui. Because of this pressure, Kugami was forced to lie. He insisted that this was not what he truly meant. Inui coldly told him to stay quiet for a moment. Kugami fell silent and did not speak another word. Jiren mocked humanity, saying they were never united, and laughed at the thought that someone among the numbers, who were meant to protect humans, would side with a calamity. Unable to speak or move, Kugami could only remain silent. But none of this affected Inui, who stood calmly in the same position. Jiren began laughing ominously once again. While he was laughing, Mimimi attacked him from behind. She shouted, asking why Inui was standing there like a log. She also asked why Kugami had turned into a human cocoon. With his hands in his pockets, Inui looked down on Jiren and said that he really could not read his mind. What Jiren had seen was only the surface of human emotions, but a human heart ran much deeper and was far more noble. He summoned his massive sword glowing with light and declared that a calamity of Jiren's level was no match for his plan. Inui acknowledged Mimimi's speed, saying he did not expect her to arrive so quickly. She made an excuse, saying she thought he was about to confess to Kanju, but when Seiseki appeared out of nowhere, she panicked and decided to help instead. It was her first time seeing Jiren in Seiseki's form, and even Inui had not expected them to meet this soon. She said she wanted to kill him at least 100 times, otherwise she would not feel satisfied. Jiren laughed at her, realizing she was the one who had destroyed his other half. He said he was about to show her what real terror looked like. An intense pressure poured out from him. Her knees and legs began to shake violently. Unable to endure it, she dropped to her knees. It was her first time experiencing the spiritual pressure of a special grade being. Inui picked her up from the ground and told her that this was not even Jiren's complete form, and that he would only grow stronger from here. He added that the numbers who sensed this pressure would arrive soon, so it would be best to stall Jiren until then. Many tentacles burst out from Jiren's neck as he challenged them, telling them to invite anyone they wanted if those foolish humans believed they could defeat him. Hearing his words, Mimimi grew frustrated. Kugami wondered why Jiren believed they still had a chance to win. Jiren pointed his finger forward and it began to glow red. Inui warned her to be careful, saying Jiren was about to use Seiseki's lock, and told her to watch the direction of his arm. Jiren fired multiple glowing keys at them, but both of them managed to dodge the attack. Mimimi activated a seal-breaking spell called Bloody Requiem. She unleashed the technique Death Parade toward Jiren. He did not even attempt to dodge and simply stood there laughing. Death Parade struck the right side of his body. Still trapped under the tiles, Kugami wondered if they had finally won. This was a move Jiren had already seen once, the same technique that had destroyed his other half. Inui stepped forward and summoned his Judgment Sword. Jiren's body regenerated completely, and multiple Judgment Swords appeared around him in a circular formation. In the very next moment, his body was torn apart into countless pieces by the blades. Inui thought that this was finally over for Jiren. While his upper body floated in the air, Jiren remarked that Inui's skill was something that purged evil, and touching it felt as if his body would be erased completely. He continued, saying that good or evil depended entirely on a person's judgment. Depending on how it was used, the same power could turn either way, calling Inui's technique a double-edged sword. Hearing those words, Inui grew angry and rushed straight toward him. Mimimi asked him what he was even trying to say. Suddenly, Jiren raised a lock and chained her in place. She was unable to move, but behind her, Inui was already preparing to launch a special attack. He instantly boosted his speed and slashed Jiren's head off, moving in a way similar to how Zenitsu used his thunder breathing. He said that even if cutting his torso hadn't worked, then cutting his neck surely would. But to his shock, cutting off his head didn't work either. While hanging upside down, Jiren calmly asked what Inui planned to cut off next. Inui slashed Jiren's face into thousands of pieces. Even that did nothing. Mimimi asked what they were supposed to do now. Thousands of pieces of Jiren floated above them in the air. It did hurt Jiren, as it took time for him to return to normal, but the question remained whether this was really enough to stall him. They believed they were stalling for time, but in truth, it was Jiren who was stalling until his reinforcements arrived. Suddenly, all of them felt a tremendous spiritual pressure. They tried to figure out where it was coming from, and Kugami realized the source of that pressure. It was the sign of a newly appearing special grade gate, and he wondered where it had appeared this time. Across Japan, citizens looked up at the sky as everything around them slowly turned red. The gate appeared horizontally above a massive tower. Jiren couldn't stop laughing, as he had finally achieved what he wanted. Shizuka rushed in by opening a door and warned them about the appearance of a special-grade gate above the sky tower. Mimimi panicked and asked what they should do next, but Inui told her to calm down. He said that the opening of a special-grade gate usually took years, and that all the numbers combined might be able to defeat Jiren first and deal with the gate later. By now, Jiren had completely merged himself, even though his left hand was missing. Kugami quickly noticed this and wondered why his left hand was gone. Jiren wouldn't rate the lock skill as SSR without a reason, so he asked if anyone was curious to know. The lock skill was powerful, but the question remained why it was so important to Jiren. Jiren revealed that he possessed a skill called Key King. In other words, it was a skill that governed all keys. He asked them what the true meaning of being locked was, a grin forming on his face. His left hand moved toward the special-grade gate that had just appeared. In that hand, a shining key took shape. Inui immediately understood what Jiren was trying to do. He was attempting to unlock the gate early using that power. Jiren praised him, calling him a wise man. Mugen's power began to surge out of Kugami. He went berserk once again, his eyes turning completely white. There was no way he would allow that to happen. Jiren laughed, and from his chest, bone-like structures emerged, resembling a ribcage. Those skeletal structures moved like strong, hardened tentacles and lunged toward Kugami. Unable to predict the attack, he was almost caught instantly. The skeletal ribs wrapped around him completely. What happened next was unclear, whether he was teleported elsewhere or absorbed entirely. Inui and Mimimi watched as he disappeared right before their eyes. Jiren smiled even wider, knowing that with Kugami gone, nothing stood in his way anymore, as it was finally time to unlock the gate. Jiren, disguised as Saseki, used his skill unlock to force the gate open immediately. Disbelief spread among the citizens toward the numbers, as they had just witnessed one special-grade calamity, and now another gate had appeared. A new calamity known as Aizen emerged from the gate high in the sky. The calamity descended by violently cutting through the sky tower as it landed on the ground. Upon seeing humans below, an appalling expression twisted across his face, and he immediately began attacking them. In mere moments, countless bodies lay scattered across the ground, while the calamity looked pleased as it fed on the remains. Jiren watched the slaughter with clear joy, encouraging Aizen to continue without restraint. Enraged by Jiren's commanding tone, Aizen suddenly swallowed Jiren's hand and screamed that he would devour every last human. Disgusted by the taste, Aizen moved on toward another group of humans, seeking more prey. People screamed, ran, and hid in desperation, while the calamity delighted in the fear echoing around him. Meanwhile, Jiren faced Inui and Mimimi, enjoying the chaos unfolding exactly as he had planned. He explained that Aizen had once been sealed for centuries due to his extreme violence, even losing a hand during that time. Inui and Mimimi exchanged grim looks, finally understanding the full scope of Jiren's plan. With a maniacal grin, Jiren praised himself for gathering all the numbers together as a feast for Aizen. He explained that fighting all the numbers alone would have been troublesome, so he cleverly redirected them. Raising his hand to his chest, he admitted that he wanted to be alone with Inui, which was why he lured everyone else toward Aizen instead. Mimimi spoke with clear disgust, saying that Inui despised people like him, and Inui calmly agreed. Inui immediately issued an emergency subjugation order to all numbers against the special-grade calamity Aizen and instructed Mimimi to assist. Mimimi objected, insisting they should defeat Jiren together first before dealing with Aizen. She scolded Inui for always trying to shoulder everything alone and argued that Kugami still needed to be saved. She firmly believed the three of them could take Jiren down together. Inui smiled faintly, pleased by his junior's resolve. Elsewhere, Aizen grew dissatisfied after slaughtering nearly everyone nearby and began searching for more humans. He spotted a man hiding with 2 children, but his attack was blocked by Kusanagi's ability at the last moment. Kusanagi's power failed to tear Aizen's arm apart, and Kiritsu followed up with his special attack. Aizen remained completely unharmed, smirking as Kiritsu and Ikadori argued in frustration. More numbers began arriving at the scene to confront the calamity. Long and Kanjuin also arrived, ready for battle. Kagurazaka-san rushed toward the scene, apologizing for her late arrival. She explained that traffic lights had delayed her, prompting Kiritsu to tell her to ignore traffic rules during emergencies. Aizen attempted a surprise attack on Kagurazaka from behind. She countered instantly and scolded him for such cowardly behavior. Wearing a grotesque grin, Aizen looked thrilled to see so many numbers gathered. He sniffed the air and called their presence an exquisite smell. All the numbers present took their combat positions. Kugami realized he was trapped inside Jiren's body, having been consumed earlier. He could not believe it was possible to unlock a sealed gate before its designated opening time. Unable to sense the outside world, he wondered if another special-grade calamity had already appeared. He shouted at Jiren, demanding to be released, when a creepy structure formed above him. Numerous tentacles emerged and wrapped tightly around his body. The bindings tightened further, restricting his movement completely. Jiren appeared before him in his original form and coldly ordered him to stay quiet. Apologizing mockingly, he said he was about to turn the world upside down. Jiren sealed Kugami's mouth, preventing him from speaking, forcing Kugami to find another way out quickly. Outside, the battle intensified as Inui and Mimimi continued their fight against Jiren. Mimimi worried about what would happen to Kugami if Jiren was killed while he was still inside him. Inui reassured her, saying he had already assigned Shizuka to assist Kugami, allowing them to focus fully on Jiren. Mimimi unleashed her special technique, the Lika March, sending waves of musical notes crashing toward him. Though Jiren was sliced apart, his body regenerated instantly, causing Mimimi to angrily shout at him to stop regenerating. Inui leaped from above and brought down his judgment sword with decisive force. Jiren split his arm into countless tentacles and extended them toward Inui. However, it was not Inui he captured, but Mimimi instead. He pulled her in front of him as a shield and taunted Inui to attack if he dared. Fear briefly flashed across Mimimi's face. Inui, however, did not waver. Without hesitation, he struck straight through her position, landing the attack directly on Jiren. Jiren froze in shock, unable to believe Inui would harm a comrade to reach him. But then Jiren noticed that Mimimi was completely unharmed, and she immediately used her weapon to counterattack. Inui's attacks only worked on souls that were recognized as evil, and their effect was even stronger on such targets. Mimimi prepared to unleash the same attack that had worked on Jiren the previous time. She activated her death barrel technique, but Jiren tried to escape its range at the last moment. Meanwhile, Shizuka was struggling to open a door leading to Kugami, but it was extremely difficult since the target was constantly moving. She asked them to buy her a little more time when suddenly someone appeared behind her, saying it was his turn to join the battle. Numerous deadly skulls manifested out of nowhere and completely surrounded Jiren. It was Kurusu who had arrived from behind. Inui questioned him, saying he had instructed Kurusu to assist the others instead. At the same time, Shizuka received a communication signal. It was a message from Kanjuin. Mimimi asked if they had already dealt with the special grade calamity on their side. Kanjuin was bleeding badly and apologized for contacting them in such a state. She revealed that all the numbers there had been wiped out by the calamity. None of them were able to stand anymore, though she believed they could have ended it with a single Sekirin Kaiku. However, the last time everyone used their Sekirin Kaiku together, the calamity Aizen devoured the attacks instead. He even claimed that the taste of Sekirin Kaiko was delicious. Aizen went so far as to praise the technique, comparing it to food prepared by a 5-star hotel chef. Now, they no longer had enough energy to use it again, and defeating Aizen without Sekirin Kaiku seemed impossible. Suddenly, the calamity charged forward and threw a powerful punch at them. The impact caused a massive explosion across the area. The blast knocked all 5 of them away at once. Ikadori called Kanjuan a genius and desperately asked if there was still any way left to defeat the monster. She replied that her Metsuku had already been devoured, leaving her powerless, and unless someone had a dreamlike ability to nullify calamity powers, defeating Aizen was impossible. Suddenly, she sat upright as a realization struck her. Everyone felt a surge of hope as they realized that Kugami's minus skill might give them a chance. Kei looked visibly unhappy again, feeling overshadowed by Kugami. Still, for humanity's sake, they had no choice but to rely on him. Only now did they truly understand why Inui always called him the hope of humanity. Even though their energy was running low, they were still numbers, and they resolved to stop the special grade calamity together no matter the cost. They decided to hold their ground and keep fighting until Kugami arrived as reinforcement. Inui asked Shizuka if she could locate Kugami, and she confirmed that she had found his position. He immediately told her to open a guidance door directly in front of Kugami, shielding him from the horrifying scene inside. She pushed herself to her limits to open it. Blood began to trickle from her nose as she continued forcing the door open. Completely focused on the task, her condition worsened, but she refused to stop. Meanwhile, the remaining numbers fought desperately against the special grade calamity. Kei grew increasingly frustrated at how long Kugami was taking while everyone was counting on him. He shouted for Kugami to hurry and get there already. It seemed his prayers were finally answered. A guidance door opened directly behind the special grade calamity, Aizen. Kugami instantly realized this enemy was not Jiren. He clenched his fist, channeling Mugen's power into it. With a single strike, he smashed the calamity's head, sending it crashing to the ground. What had happened inside Jiren was that Kugami had been desperately calling for help. Suddenly, a guidance door appeared in front of him. Though he assumed Shizuka had opened it, he had no idea where he would be sent. The moment he arrived, he realized he was in a completely different place, and standing before him was a newly emerged special grade calamity. So he instantly quenched his fast in an attempt to take Aizen down with him on the ground. Everyone suddenly bloomed with smiles except Kei. Well, everyone knew Kei didn't really show his feelings. Aizen was so heavy that when he fell to the ground, the area around him cracked as well. Kugami asked if everyone was all right. He hadn't even landed yet, but Aizen woke up from the ground and tried to bite him. Aizen grew angry because he was just getting his stomach full when someone interrupted his meal. That was why he attacked Kugami, intending to eat him as well. Kogami instantly used his Sekirin Kaiku, Divine Retribution. A strange smile appeared on Aizen's face, as if he were looking at something delicious. He tried to absorb all of Kugami's Sekirin Kaiku. His companions tried to warn him, but Kugami didn't need to worry, as he had a skill that could stop Aizen. He used his minus skill to cancel the energy flowing into Aizen's mouth. The energy stopped flowing, leaving Aizen confused about what had happened. Kugami raised several tentacles that wrapped around his hand. He extended his arm toward Aizen, directing them at him. Aizen recognized the technique as it was similar to Jiren's, but he was completely trapped. While extending his other hand, Kugami said he would use Aizen's own power against him. He activated the skill Devour, but instead of absorbing anything, energy began to gather in his hand. He then threw a punch at Aizen using the accumulated energy. The punch sent Aizen flying far away and caused a massive explosion. However, it was not Aizen who was thrown away but his right arm, and he realized it too late. By the time he noticed, his severed arm was already bleeding continuously. Everyone felt relieved seeing that Kugami had dealt a heavy blow to Aizen. Even Kei was smiling without realizing it, but once he noticed, he quickly stopped. He began complaining that anyone with such a skill could do the same. Even after losing his arm, several new ones grew back, leaving him with 6 arms. In rage, he declared he would kill Kugami. He suddenly tried to grab and body slam him. Wait a second, was that a Naruto reference? Kugami just used a jutsu. Yes, it was the same skill he once used against Jiren, called Divide. Many clones of him appeared and attacked Aizen. They punched him repeatedly, leaving him unable to respond. Together, they kept attacking until he was overwhelmed. The punches dealt heavy damage, but they were still not enough to completely bring him down. Aizen wondered how strong Kugami really was, being beaten one-sidedly by a human, and refused to acknowledge him as one. However, Aizen was not someone who could be defeated so easily. He jumped again, attempting another body slam. This time, he floated upward and began swelling like a balloon, blocking the sunlight. He appeared to be absorbing solar energy from the sun. He then unleashed a powerful attack on Kugami. Since it was a shockwave produced by Aizen's roar, Kugami couldn't cancel it with his minus skill. With nowhere to escape, he was about to be hit, but was suddenly pulled out of range. It was Kei's skill that saved him through instantaneous movement. Kugami was surprised that Kei saved him and thanked him. Kei, still acting indifferent, told him to shut up and focus on the fight. He said he wouldn't let Kugami take all the credit. It was their first time fighting together. Kugami tried to suggest a strategy, but Kei refused to take orders from someone who wasn't even a number. Meanwhile, in the battle against Jiren, they received news that Kugami had arrived in time and things were going well there. Since Jiren had no moves left, Inui asked him to surrender. Jiren couldn't stop laughing, as everything was still proceeding according to his plan. Inui asked everyone to leave the upcoming calamity to him, and they all agreed. Jiren spread his tentacles across the area. Inui spoke calmly, stating that Jiren's sense of justice was vague and easily shaken. That was fine, since he had no intention of representing humanity's justice. Instead, he would rely on his own judgment, his skill judgment, which was created for that very purpose. He unleashed his sacred Sekirin Kaiku, divine punishment and judgment. Golden light poured down like falling blades. His posture remained calm, as if the verdict had already been passed. A massive symbol appeared behind Jiren, while Inui stood before him glowing with holy light. The sentence had already been decided. Jiren pretended to cry for help, acting as though he couldn't move. Absolute judgment kill was a technique that never missed and always delivered justice. A holy divine sword pointed directly at Jiren, ready to pierce him. It was time for heavenly judgment. Jiren smiled and spoke a single name, Kuro Kyoko. He continued smiling, as if that name could save him. Inui asked why he said that name. Jiren then asked if he wanted his beloved Kyoko back. That was her, the one Inui lost 6 years ago, the moment he saved Kugami and lost everything else.